What if the biggest problem in your intimate life isn't your body, your age, your relationship, or even your desire, but the pressure you've been carrying to be good enough? Imagine spending years believing that intimacy is a performance. You measure yourself against impossible standards, compare your body with carefully edited images, worrying about whether you respond normally, and quietly wonder whether something is wrong with you. At the same time, you may be working toward financial security, chasing a bigger income, saving for the future, and wondering why having more still doesn't always make you feel free. Then something changes. You stop asking, "How do I become perfect?" and begin asking, "What actually matters to me?" That single question can transform everything. Your body becomes something to understand rather than criticize. Your relationship becomes something to communicate within rather than perform inside. Money becomes a tool for freedom rather than a measurement of worth. Boundaries become expressions of self-respect rather than rejection. And pleasure becomes something you can experience without turning it into a test. But there is a deeper challenge. You cannot control everything. You cannot control another person's feelings. You cannot guarantee desire. You cannot predict the future. You cannot eliminate every financial risk or prevent every unexpected change. What you can control is how you respond. You can learn. You can communicate. You can save. You can ask for help. You can say yes. You can say no. You can begin again. And perhaps real freedom starts there, not when life becomes perfect, but when you trust yourself enough to face its uncertainty. Your body is not a performance. Your relationship is not a competition. Your bank account is not your identity. Your mistakes are not your final chapter. The question is no longer, "Am I enough?" The question is, "What kind of life am I choosing to build, and what will I do today to move toward it?" Imagine walking into a room carrying a question you have never been brave enough to say aloud. You look around and realize that almost everyone else is carrying a similar question. Some are wondering why desire seems effortless at certain times and completely absent at others. Some are wondering why a relationship that once felt exciting now feels predictable. Some are worried that their body has changed, that stress has taken something away from them, or that they are somehow failing at something everyone else seems to understand naturally. And some are simply wondering whether the way they experience intimacy is normal. The surprising answer is that there is no single version of normal. Human sexuality is far more individual, responsive, emotional, psychological, and contextual than most of us were ever taught to believe. If I were standing before an audience tonight, I would begin with one request. Forget everything you think you are supposed to be. Forget the imaginary standard you have been comparing yourself with. Forget the movies that taught you desire should always arrive at the perfect moment. Forget the idea that attraction should never change. Forget the belief that confidence means never feeling awkward. Forget the assumption that a successful intimate relationship is one in which nothing ever becomes difficult. Real people do not live according to scripts. They live through changing bodies, changing emotions, changing circumstances, changing relationships, changing responsibilities, and changing ideas about themselves. The science of sexuality becomes much more interesting when we stop treating human beings like machines and start recognizing them as living systems. One of the most damaging myths is that desire should always come first. We imagine a simple sequence. Attraction appears, desire rises, intimacy follows, pleasure happens, and everyone lives happily ever after. But human experience is rarely so neat. Sometimes desire appears spontaneously, sometimes it develops after emotional closeness, sometimes it grows through affectionate contact, sometimes it disappears temporarily because of stress, exhaustion, medication, illness, conflict, grief, or simply because life has become overwhelmingly busy. None of these experiences automatically means something is broken. Consider Elena, a fictional woman in her late 30s who had spent years believing she had lost something essential. She loved her partner, David. Their relationship was supportive and affectionate. They laughed together, shared responsibilities, and had built a life that many people would consider successful. Yet Elena had begun worrying about her lack of spontaneous desire. She remembered an earlier period when attraction seemed to appear without effort. She interpreted the difference as evidence that something was wrong with her. Every time David initiated affection, a question appeared in her mind. Why don't I feel more? Why am I not responding the way I used to? Shouldn't I want this? The more she monitored herself, the harder it became to relax. The more she evaluated her response, the more distant she felt from the actual experience. Eventually, intimacy itself became a test. She was no longer asking, "What am I experiencing?" She was asking, "Am I experiencing the correct thing?" That distinction changed everything. When an experience becomes an examination, the mind often stops participating freely in it. Imagine trying to laugh naturally while constantly checking whether your laugh sounds convincing. Imagine trying to fall asleep while repeatedly asking whether you are asleep yet. Imagine trying to enjoy a beautiful sunset while wondering whether you are appreciating it enough. The more closely you monitor the experience, the more difficult it can become to simply experience it. Intimacy can be affected by the same psychological pressure. Elena did not need another performance standard. She needed permission to become curious again. She began asking different questions. What helps me feel comfortable? When do I feel most connected? What kinds of affection do I enjoy? What makes me feel rushed? What thoughts interrupt my attention? What does my body respond to when I am not judging it? What would closeness feel like if there were no requirement to produce a particular outcome? The questions were more useful than the old demands. This is one of the principles I would want every person listening to understand. You cannot build a healthy relationship with your inner world by constantly treating yourself as a problem to be fixed. Growth and self-rejection are not the same thing. You can want change without declaring war on yourself. You can improve your health without hating your body. You can communicate about intimacy without assuming that something is wrong. You can develop confidence without pretending insecurity never exists, and you can pursue a better financial life without turning money into a measure of your worth. That final point might seem unrelated, but it is not. The way we think about money often reveals the way we think about ourselves. Someone who believes they are never enough may chase income endlessly. Someone who fears uncertainty may accumulate possessions as a substitute for security. Someone who compares themselves constantly may spend money to demonstrate success. Someone who feels deprived may swing between extreme restriction and impulsive spending. Financial freedom therefore begins with more than mathematics. It begins with awareness. Ask yourself what you believe money is supposed to prove. Does a larger income make you feel more worthy? Does spending make you feel successful? Does saving make you feel safe? Does financial uncertainty make you question your identity? Money is powerful, but it becomes dangerous when it is asked to solve emotional problems that money cannot solve. A useful principle is this: use money to create freedom, not to manufacture identity. Elena discovered something similar about intimacy. She had been using sexual responsiveness as a measurement of her identity. If she desired her partner, she felt desirable. If she did not, she felt defective. Her emotional state depended upon a biological response that could naturally fluctuate. Once she separated her worth from her moment-to-moment sexual response, she became less frightened by change. This did not mean she ignored the issue. She became more attentive to it. There is a profound difference between attention and judgment. Judgment says, "Something is wrong with me." Attention says, "Something is happening. Let me understand it." That difference can transform the way we approach almost every part of life. Suppose your desire has changed. Instead of immediately concluding that your relationship is failing, investigate the context. How much sleep are you getting? What pressures are occupying your mind? Are you experiencing resentment? Have you had enough private time? Are you comfortable communicating your preferences? Has medication changed anything? Has your body changed? Are you dealing with pain? Are you experiencing anxiety or low mood? Do you feel emotionally connected? Are you carrying responsibilities that leave little space for yourself? The body does not exist separately from the rest of Life. This is one reason sexuality cannot be understood through isolated techniques alone. A person may have a perfectly healthy body and still struggle with intimacy because of relationship tension. Another person may feel emotionally connected yet experience physical difficulties requiring medical attention. Someone else may feel desire but struggle with shame. Another may feel deeply attracted to a partner but have no mental space because of chronic stress. There is no single lever. Human sexuality is a conversation among body, mind, relationship, environment, history, expectations, and circumstance. Think about stress. When your mind is overwhelmed by deadlines, debt, family responsibilities, conflict, or fear, your attention becomes occupied. You may be physically present but mentally somewhere else. A partner may interpret this as rejection. You may interpret it as loss of attraction. Both interpretations can be wrong. Sometimes the problem is not lack of love. Sometimes there is simply too much noise. Daniel, another fictional character, discovered this after years of assuming his partner's withdrawal was personal. His wife, Sarah, had been working long hours while also caring for an aging parent. Daniel noticed that she seemed distracted and less interested in affection. He quietly began constructing a story in his mind. She isn't attracted to me anymore. He did not ask. Instead, he became more anxious. His anxiety made him seek reassurance indirectly. He became sensitive to every small gesture. If Sarah was tired, he interpreted it as rejection. If she wanted to sleep early, he saw it as evidence. If she was affectionate but did not want intimacy, he wondered what it meant. Eventually, their relationship became filled with invisible conversations. Daniel was thinking one thing. Sarah was experiencing another. Neither knew what the other was actually carrying. Then one evening, instead of asking, "Why don't you want me anymore?" Daniel asked, "How are you doing lately?" Sarah began to cry. She told him she felt exhausted. She had been worried about her mother, frightened about work, and guilty that she could not give everyone what they needed. She had not stopped loving Daniel. She had simply run out of psychological space. The question opened a door that accusation would have closed. That evening taught Daniel a lesson he would never forget. Before interpreting someone's behavior, investigate the story surrounding it. This principle works in relationships and finances. If your bank balance is falling, do not immediately call yourself irresponsible. Examine the system. If your partner is distant, do not immediately call yourself undesirable. Examine the context. If you are struggling with desire, do not immediately label yourself broken. Examine the whole picture. Curiosity creates possibilities. Judgment closes them. This does not mean every problem disappears when we communicate. Sometimes difficult conversations reveal genuine incompatibilities. Sometimes relationships need professional support. Sometimes medical evaluation is appropriate. Sometimes a financial plan really does need major changes. Sometimes a boundary needs to be established, but you can respond more intelligently when you understand the problem accurately. That is why self-awareness matters. And self-awareness is not endless self-analysis. It is learning to notice patterns. When do I feel most alive? When do I shut down? What situations make me anxious? What helps me feel safe? What makes me feel pressured? What do I need but struggle to express? What assumptions am I carrying? What expectations did I inherit from culture, family, media, religion, peers, or previous relationships? Which of these expectations actually belong to me? These questions can be uncomfortable, but discomfort is not always a signal to stop. Sometimes, discomfort is the beginning of understanding. Imagine someone who has spent decades believing that intimacy must look a certain way. They may never have considered whether that script fits their actual personality. They may believe that a particular level of desire, frequency, appearance, or performance determines whether their relationship is successful. But where did that standard come from? Who created it? Who benefits when people feel inadequate? Advertising thrives on insecurity. Entertainment often thrives on fantasy. Social comparison thrives on selective presentation. The human being watching all of this can easily conclude that everyone else is living a more exciting, more attractive, more financially successful, more passionate life, but comparison rarely compares reality with reality. It compares your private experience with someone else's public presentation. That is a losing game. Financial comparison works the same way. You see someone's house, you do not see their debt, you see their vacation. You do not see their credit card statement. You see their career announcement. You do not see their anxiety. You see their relationship photograph. You do not see the conversation they had afterward. The lesson is simple. Do not build your definition of success from incomplete information. Instead, define success for yourself. For Elena, success eventually stopped meaning I always feel spontaneous desire. It became I can talk honestly about my experience without shame, understand what influences it, and build intimacy in ways that feel authentic. That was a much healthier goal. For Daniel, success stopped meaning my partner always wants me. It became we can communicate about desire without turning differences into personal rejection. For their financial lives, success stopped meaning we must become wealthy. It became our money supports our priorities, protects us against reasonable risks, and gives us increasing freedom of choice. Notice the pattern. The goal shifted from performance to well-being. That shift is powerful. Performance asks, how am I doing compared with the standard? Well-being asks, is this life working for me? Performance creates anxiety. Well-being creates information, and information allows adjustment. There is another misconception worth challenging, that confidence must come before action. Many people wait to feel confident before communicating honestly, changing their financial habits, setting boundaries, exploring their preferences, or seeking help. But confidence is often the result of action rather than the prerequisite. You communicate honestly, survive the discomfort, and discover that you can do it again. You make a responsible financial decision, watch your savings grow, and develop trust in yourself. You establish a boundary, experience the discomfort, and discover that your world does not collapse. You ask for help, realize that needing support does not make you weak, and become more willing to seek it in the future. Confidence grows through evidence. And evidence comes from experience. This is why tiny actions matter. You do not need to transform your entire life tonight. You can begin with one conversation. One financial review. One honest question. One boundary. One moment of paying attention. One decision to stop comparing. One decision to treat your body with respect. One decision to ask what you actually want, instead of what you think you should want. Progress does not always announce itself dramatically. Sometimes, it looks like a person who used to remain silent finally saying, I'd like to talk about something. Sometimes, it looks like someone who used to spend impulsively waiting 24 hours before making a purchase. Sometimes it looks like a couple sitting together, without trying to solve each other. Sometimes, it looks like someone looking at their reflection and saying, this is my body today, and I am allowed to care for it without hating it. Those moments may appear small. They are not. Small choices repeated consistently become a life, and that is why financial freedom and relational well-being have something important in common. Both are built more through habits than through dramatic events. Financial freedom rarely arrives because of one magical decision. It usually grows through spending less than you earn where possible, managing high-cost debt responsibly, maintaining appropriate emergency reserves, investing according to a considered strategy and risk tolerance, increasing skills and earning capacity, and resisting lifestyle inflation that automatically consumes every increase in income. Likewise, healthy intimacy rarely appears because of one perfect conversation. It grows through listening, honesty, affection, respect, boundaries, curiosity, repair, attention, and the willingness to keep learning. The principle is the same. What you repeatedly practice becomes easier to live. Daniel wrote that sentence on a piece of paper and kept it near his desk. Underneath it He added another, freedom grows when your daily choices serve your long-term values. He was talking about money, but eventually he realized he was talking about everything. If you value health, your daily choices should protect it. If you value connection, your daily choices should make room for it. If you value freedom, your daily choices should avoid unnecessary obligations. If you value intimacy, your daily choices should cultivate trust. If you value learning, your daily choices should include curiosity. If you value peace, your daily choices should not constantly manufacture chaos. The future is not created only by major decisions. It is created by ordinary repetition. That realization changed the way Elena thought about herself. She stopped waiting for a dramatic return of the person she used to be. Instead, she became interested in the person she was becoming. That distinction gave her hope. She did not need to go backward. She could move forward. Her body was not required to remain exactly as it had been. Her relationship did not need to recreate its earliest years. Her desire did not need to follow a fixed schedule. Her confidence did not need to look like certainty. She could discover a new version of intimacy that belonged to the life she actually lived now, and perhaps that is where the most interesting journey begins. Not when we finally understand ourselves, but when we become willing to keep discovering ourselves. Because there is no final version of a human being, there is only the person you are today, the person circumstances are asking you to become, and the choices you make in the space between them. And if you learn to approach that space with curiosity instead of judgment, with responsibility instead of fear, and with freedom instead of comparison, you may discover something remarkable. You are never required to become someone else's idea of normal. You are always allowed to become more fully yourself. There is a moment in many relationships when two people realize they have been talking for years without actually saying the things that matter most. They discuss schedules, groceries, work, family obligations, appointments, bills, vacations, and plans for the weekend. They can become remarkably efficient at managing a household while becoming surprisingly uncertain about the inner world of the person sleeping beside them. The silence is rarely deliberate. Usually, it develops gradually. A question is postponed because the timing feels wrong. A preference is softened because the person fears disappointing their partner. A concern is hidden because it seems too embarrassing. A change in desire is interpreted privately instead of discussed openly. Eventually, both people may begin living beside assumptions rather than facts. This is where communication becomes more than a relationship skill. It becomes a form of intimacy. If I were speaking to a room filled with people who had spent years trying to understand relationships, I would tell them that communication is not simply the ability to exchange information. You can exchange enormous amounts of information without revealing anything important. You can talk all day and remain emotionally hidden. Genuine communication requires something more demanding: the willingness to let another person see what is actually happening inside you. That does not mean saying every thought that enters your mind. Honesty is not the same as emotional dumping. Authenticity is not permission to be careless with another person's feelings. Healthy communication involves truth, timing, responsibility, empathy, and respect. Imagine a couple named Priya and Marcus. They had been together for 9 years. From the outside, they appeared stable. They owned a home, had steady careers, and had learned how to navigate the ordinary complications of adult life. Yet both felt lonely in ways they had never fully admitted. Marcus believed Priya was no longer interested in him. Priya believed Marcus was constantly evaluating her. Neither statement was entirely accurate. Marcus had become hesitant because several attempts at initiating affection had not been reciprocated. He interpreted those moments as rejection and gradually stopped initiating. Priya noticed his withdrawal and interpreted it as loss of attraction. She became self-conscious and began worrying that her appearance had changed. The cycle was almost invisible. He withdrew because he feared rejection. She became anxious because he withdrew. Her anxiety made her less spontaneous. His interpretation became stronger. Neither person was intentionally hurting the other. They were responding to stories they had created in the absence of conversation. One evening, Priya finally said, "Can I tell you something without you trying to solve it?" Marcus looked surprised. "Okay, I've been feeling like you don't find me attractive anymore." He immediately wanted to deny it. That's not true. But he remembered her request. Instead of launching into reassurance, he asked, "What makes you feel that way?" She explained. Then he told her his side. "I stopped initiating because I felt rejected. I thought you didn't want me." Priya stared at him. "I thought you stopped because you weren't attracted to me." For several seconds, neither spoke. Then they laughed. Not because the situation was trivial, because they had spent months suffering from two interpretations that had been reinforcing each other. That moment did not solve everything, but it changed the direction of the relationship. This is why questions can be more powerful than assumptions. A question leaves space for reality. An assumption fills the space before reality arrives. One of the most useful questions in an intimate relationship is remarkably simple. What is this like for you? Not why are you doing this? Not what's wrong with you? Not don't you love me? But what is this like for you? The question changes the atmosphere. It moves the conversation away from prosecution and toward discovery. And discovery is essential because desire, attraction, comfort, and emotional connection, not static properties that belong permanently to one person. They are influenced by context. A person may feel desire when relaxed and very little when exhausted. They may feel affectionate but not interested in a particular kind of intimacy. They may want closeness while simultaneously needing space. They may enjoy physical affection without wanting it to lead somewhere else. They may want to initiate sometimes and be approached at other times. They may need emotional connection before physical desire becomes accessible. None of this automatically represents contradiction. Human beings contain multiple needs at once. We can want independence and closeness. Security and novelty, routine and adventure, affection and solitude, predictability and surprise. The mistake is believing that healthy relationships eliminate these tensions. They do not. Healthy relationships learn how to negotiate them. Negotiation is not a sign that love is weak. It is evidence that two separate people are still present. That distinction matters enormously. A relationship becomes unhealthy when one person believes closeness means eliminating the other person's autonomy. I love you, therefore you should want what I want. But love does not create entitlement. If one person wants intimacy and the other does not, the answer cannot be pressure. The answer is communication. What does the person want? What does the other person want? What alternatives for closeness exist? What circumstances are affecting the situation? What boundaries need to be respected? What can be revisited later? Consent is not merely a formal word used in extreme situations. At its healthiest, consent is part of everyday communication. It means recognizing that another person's body and choices remain their own. The same principle applies to emotional space. If your partner needs time alone, that does not necessarily mean they are rejecting you. If you need time alone, you do not have to apologize for being an individual. Closeness becomes more meaningful when separation is permitted. Think about breathing. You cannot inhale forever. You must also exhale. Relationship needs a similar rhythm. Connection. Space. Connection. Space. The goal is not permanent fusion. It is secure connection between two people who remain whole. This idea can feel frightening to someone whose sense of safety depends on constant reassurance. They may think, if my partner needs space, I am losing them. But independence does not automatically weaken intimacy. Sometimes it strengthens it. A person who has room to think, rest, work, create, socialize, and develop their own interests can return to a relationship with more energy and perspective. This is where self-knowledge becomes important. Before asking a partner to meet every emotional need, ask yourself what you can provide for yourself. Can you soothe yourself sometimes? Can you tolerate temporary uncertainty? Can you maintain friendships? Can you pursue meaningful work? Can you care for your body? Can you develop interests outside the relationship? Can you recognize when you need professional support rather than expecting your partner to become your therapist? These questions are not arguments for emotional distance. They are arguments for emotional resilience. The stronger your sense of self, the more freely you can choose connection rather than clinging to it from fear. This principle also has a financial equivalent. Financial independence does not mean refusing all help. It means developing enough capability and margin that your survival does not depend entirely upon someone else's choices. A healthy financial relationship between partners includes transparency, shared planning, and respect for individual autonomy. Couples can combine finances completely, partially, or maintain certain separate accounts depending on their circumstances and agreements. The important issue is not that every couple must use one system. The important issue is that neither person is being deceived, controlled, or financially trapped. A useful principle is this: financial dependence should be a conscious arrangement, not an accidental vulnerability. Know what comes in. Know what goes out. Know what you owe. Know what you own. Know your obligations. Know your emergency resources. Know your long-term goals. And most importantly, discuss money before money becomes a crisis. Many couples can discuss sex more easily than money. Others can discuss money, but cannot talk honestly about desire. Both forms of avoidance create vulnerability. Money and intimacy have something surprisingly important in common. Silence creates room for assumptions. If one partner thinks they are saving for a house while the other is secretly planning a career change, conflict is inevitable. If one partner thinks physical affection always signals sexual interest while the other experiences affection as comfort and connection, misunderstanding is inevitable. The solution is not to eliminate differences. It is to make the differences discussable. That word matters. Discussable. A relationship does not need complete agreement to be healthy. It needs enough safety for disagreement to be expressed. Imagine saying, "I understand that this is important to you, but I don't experience it the same way." That sentence can be incredibly intimate. It says, "I am willing to remain present even though we are different." Many people fear difference because they equate it with incompatibility, but difference is inevitable. The question is whether the difference can be negotiated respectfully. Some differences can, some cannot, and recognizing the distinction is part of maturity. Suppose one partner wants to live in another country and the other absolutely does not. No communication technique can guarantee a perfect compromise. Suppose one person wants children and the other does not. That is not a problem that can always be solved through better listening. Suppose one person expects complete financial merging while the other requires financial independence. That requires a serious conversation about values and practical arrangements. Communication does not magically erase incompatibility. It reveals it. And that is useful. An honest incompatibility discovered early is often less destructive than a hidden incompatibility maintained through years of avoidance. This is why conversations about values should happen before resentment accumulates. What does commitment mean to you? What does financial security mean? What does fidelity mean? What kind of independence do you need? How do you handle conflict? How do you want to divide responsibilities? How do you respond when desire changes? What happens when one person's needs differ from the other's? How do you repair after an argument? What does respect look like in practice? There is no universal answer. There is only the answer to people are willing to build together, and even that answer may change. A couple in their 20s may have very different needs from the same couple 20 years later. Children may alter schedules. Career changes may alter stress. Illness may alter physical possibilities. Pregnancy and postpartum experiences may alter bodies and emotions. Menopause may alter comfort and hormonal patterns. Aging may change energy. Medication can influence sexual functioning. Mental health can affect desire and arousal. Financial pressure can alter emotional availability. Grief can temporarily change almost everything. None of this means a relationship has failed. It means relationships exist inside human lives. Human lives change. The mature response is adaptation. This is why expecting intimacy to remain identical for decades can create unnecessary disappointment. The goal is not to preserve a particular moment forever. The goal is to remain connected as circumstances evolve. Think about a river. If you demand that the water remain exactly where it was yesterday, you are not asking for stability. You are asking for the river to stop being a river. Relationships are similar. Movement is not necessarily instability. Change is not necessarily loss. Sometimes a new form of intimacy is waiting on the other side of an old expectation. This is particularly important when discussing desire. People often believe desire should always be spontaneous. They expect a sudden internal signal that says, "I want intimacy now." Sometimes that happens, but for many people, desire can also emerge responsively. A person may begin with affection, relaxation, conversation, touch, or closeness and discover that desire develops later. That does not mean anyone should continue an activity they do not want. Consent remains essential throughout, but it does challenge the idea that desire must always appear before any affectionate or intimate contact begins. Imagine someone saying, "I never feel desire spontaneously anymore, so I must have lost it." Perhaps not. Perhaps their experience of desire has changed. Perhaps they need different conditions. Perhaps they need more time. Perhaps they need less pressure. Perhaps they need emotional connection. Perhaps they need rest. Perhaps they need to address a medical issue. Perhaps they need to explore what actually feels good now rather than comparing themselves with who they were years ago. The question should be investigative, not accusatory. What conditions help my desire emerge? That is a much more useful question than why am I broken? The same approach can be used with the body. Body confidence is often misunderstood as loving every part of yourself every day. That is an unrealistic standard. Some days you may feel attractive. Some days you may feel ordinary. Some days you may dislike a photograph. Some days you may feel uncomfortable in your body. You do not need to adore every aspect of yourself to treat yourself with dignity. Body neutrality can be powerful. This is my body. It changes. It deserves care. I do not have to earn respect by looking a particular way. I do not need to compare it with someone else's. That attitude reduces the pressure that appearance must constantly provide proof of worth. And again, this connects to money. You do not have to become rich enough to prove that you are successful. You do not have to own impressive things to prove that your life has value. You do not have to spend beyond your means to keep up with an imagined standard. A financially healthy life can be modest. A wealthy-looking life can be financially fragile. What matters is alignment. Does your spending reflect your priorities? Does your financial strategy match your risk tolerance and time horizon? Are you building resilience? Are you protecting yourself against foreseeable problems? Are you investing in skills that increase your options? Are you allowing yourself appropriate enjoyment rather than treating life as one endless preparation for a future that may never arrive? A powerful financial principle is save for the future without sacrificing the entire present. Balance matters. Extreme deprivation can create resentment and rebound spending. Endless consumption can create dependency and financial stress. The healthier approach is intentionality. Spend generously in what genuinely matters to you. Spend cautiously on what exists primarily to impress others. Save consistently for important goals. Invest thoughtfully. Maintain appropriate protection against emergencies. And remember that your time is also a resource. People often optimize money while wasting attention. They negotiate a small discount while spending hours scrolling. They search endlessly for the cheapest option while sacrificing sleep. They work additional hours for money they then spend recovering from exhaustion. Financial freedom should not become another form of captivity. If every dollar saved costs you, your health, relationships, and entire present life, something needs to be reconsidered. The objective is not maximum accumulation. The objective is a sustainable life. That word sustainable is important. Can you maintain this? Can you continue it for years? Can your relationship survive this communication pattern? Can your budget survive this spending pattern? Can your body survive this schedule? Can your emotional life survive this level of pressure? If the answer is no, the system needs adjustment. A sustainable life is not necessarily an easy life. It is a life whose demands remain compatible with the resources available. That is why boundaries matter. A boundary is not a punishment. It is information. I cannot do that. I need time. I am not comfortable with this. I can help with this, but not that. I want to continue this conversation, but not while we are shouting. I can afford this amount, but not more. I need rest tonight. I am willing to discuss our relationship, but I will not accept insults. Boundaries protect relationships because they make expectations visible. Without boundaries, resentment often grows silently. People say yes while meaning no. Then they become angry that the other person did not somehow know. Healthy relationships require people to communicate their limits before those limits become explosions. Of course, setting a boundary can be frightening. You may fear rejection. You may fear being called selfish. You may fear conflict. You may fear that saying no will cause someone to leave. But consider the alternative. What happens when you repeatedly betray yourself to keep someone else comfortable? You may preserve the relationship externally while destroying trust internally. Self-abandonment is not intimacy. It is not sustainable. The goal is not to become rigid. It is to become clear. Clarity allows negotiation. Confusion creates resentment. Marcus eventually learned this with Priya. Instead of silently withdrawing when he felt rejected, he learned to say, "I miss feeling close to you. I don't want to pressure you, but I'd like us to talk about what closeness feels like for both of us." Priya learned to say, "I care about you, and sometimes I need affection," without it becoming a request for something more. Those statements were not magical, but they were clear, and clarity gave them something they had lacked for months: accurate information. The relationship could finally respond to reality instead of assumptions. This is one of the most powerful lessons in intimacy. Clarity is kinder than prolonged guessing. Not every truth needs to be delivered harshly. You can be honest and compassionate simultaneously. You can say difficult things without humiliating someone. You can disagree without attacking character. You can describe your experience without declaring another person's intention. Compare these statements: "You don't care about me," with "I've been feeling disconnected lately, and I miss you," or "You never want intimacy," with "I've noticed we've had less physical closeness recently, and I'd like to understand how you're experiencing it," or "You're terrible with money," with "I'm worried about our spending and would like us to look at the numbers together." The second versions create openings. They do not guarantee agreement, but they create the possibility of conversation. This is the difference between criticism and invitation. Criticism says, "You are the problem." Invitation says, "There is a problem. Can we understand it together?" The latter does not always work, but it gives the relationship a chance, and sometimes that chance is enough to begin rebuilding trust. Trust is not created by promises alone. It is created through repeated experiences. You say what you will do. Then you do it. You make a mistake. You acknowledge it. You hurt someone. You repair. You establish a boundary. You respect theirs. You ask for vulnerability. You respond carefully. Over time, the nervous system learns. This person is safe enough to be honest with. That is intimacy. Not perfection. Safety. And safety does not mean nothing difficult ever happens. It means difficult things can be discussed without automatically becoming catastrophic. This is why repair matters so much. Every couple will misunderstand each other. Every person will occasionally say the wrong thing. Every relationship will contain moments of frustration. The question is not whether mistakes happen. The question is what happens afterward. A sincere apology is not, "I'm sorry you felt that way." It takes responsibility. "I see what I did. I understand how it affected you. I regret it. Here is what I will try to do differently." Then comes the difficult part, changing behavior. Apologies without behavioral change eventually become noise. The same is true of financial promises. "I'll start budgeting. I'll stop hiding purchases. I'll save more. I'll deal with the debt." If nothing changes, trust decreases. A financial relationship, like an intimate relationship, is built through consistency. One of the most valuable things couples can do is create regular moments when they discuss important matters before those matters become emergencies. A monthly financial conversation can be useful. A regular relationship check-in can be useful. Not because every relationship needs formal meetings forever, but because intentional attention prevents neglect. Ask, "What is going well? What feels difficult? Is there something you have been afraid to tell me? What do you need more of? What do you need less of? How are we doing financially? Are our current choices supporting the life we say we want? What should we change?" These questions require courage. But courage does not mean feeling no fear. Courage means deciding that the conversation is worth having despite the fear. And sometimes the answer will be uncomfortable. Perhaps one partner is unhappy. Perhaps spending is out of control. Perhaps desire has changed. Perhaps someone needs more independence. Perhaps a medical issue needs attention. Perhaps resentment has been accumulating. The purpose of communication is not to guarantee pleasant answers. It is to bring reality into the room. Because once reality is visible, choices become possible, and choice is the beginning of freedom. That is why the science of relationships is ultimately connected to something larger than sex. It is connected to how human beings navigate uncertainty, how we interpret signals, how we regulate emotion, how we form attachments, how we communicate needs, how we respond to rejection. How we manage boundaries, how we adapt to change, how we build trust, how we decide what matters, and how we create lives that are not merely impressive from the outside, but meaningful from the inside. Priya and Marcus did not become a perfect couple. They became a more honest one. They learned to ask instead of assume. They learned to listen without immediately defending themselves. They learned that affection did not always need to lead somewhere. They learned that desire could change without becoming a verdict on their relationship. They learned that saying no did not automatically mean saying no to the person. They learned that saying yes was most meaningful when it was freely chosen. And they learned that their financial conversations could follow the same philosophy. No shame, no secrecy, no performance, just information, priorities, choices, and shared responsibility. Their lives remained complicated, but the complication was no longer hidden. And hidden problems tend to grow. Discussed problems can be addressed. That is why one of the most valuable habits you can develop is the habit of bringing things into the light. Not everything needs an immediate solution, but almost everything important deserves a place where it can be spoken. A fear, a desire, a boundary, a dream, a disappointment, a financial concern. A change, a question, a hope. Sometimes the most intimate sentence you can say is not "I love you." Sometimes it is, "I don't know what is happening inside me, but I want to understand it with you." That sentence contains humility. It contains curiosity. It contains partnership. And it creates room for something extraordinary. Discovery. Because the truth is that none of us ever completely finishes becoming. Your partner will change. You will change. Your body will change. Your priorities will change. Your financial circumstances will change. Your definition of success will change. The relationship will change. The question is not whether change can be prevented. It cannot. The question is whether you can remain connected to yourself and to each other while change happens. That is the work. And perhaps that is also the opportunity, because when you stop demanding that life remain exactly as it was, you become free to discover what it can become. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from spending years trying to become the person you think other people will find attractive. You change the way you dress, study your reflection, compare your body with photographs, monitor your age, measure your desirability against the attention you receive, and quietly wonder whether you are still enough. The tragedy is not simply that these comparisons can make us unhappy. It is that they can pull us away from the very experience we are trying to improve. Instead of living inside our bodies, we begin observing them from the outside. Instead of experiencing closeness, we evaluate our performance. Instead of asking, what feels meaningful, we ask whether we look as though we are having the right experience. I want to pause there, because this is where so many stories about intimacy become unnecessarily cruel. The human body was never designed to function as a permanent advertisement. It is not a product that must remain competitive in the marketplace of appearances. It changes because it is alive. It carries stress, illness, pleasure, fatigue, memory, age, recovery, hormones, movement, grief, laughter, and years of ordinary existence. Expecting it never to change is not an expression of confidence. It is a rejection of reality. And yet, people are constantly taught to evaluate themselves as if their bodies were projects with a final completion date. They are told to improve, tighten, reduce, enlarge, conceal, reveal, correct, reverse, and maintain. The message is rarely, learn to inhabit yourself. It is usually, learn to become more acceptable. There is a profound difference. Imagine a woman named Sophia standing before her bedroom mirror one evening. She is preparing for a dinner with her partner. She has changed clothes 3 times. One dress makes her feel too visible, another makes her feel older. A third is comfortable, but does not look like the image she has in her mind of what someone attractive is supposed to look like. Her partner tells her she looks beautiful, but, instead of receiving the compliment, she studies his face for evidence that he means it. She is not experiencing the evening. She is auditing herself. That is exhausting. Now imagine that Sophia begins a different practice. She looks in the mirror and asks, how do I feel in this body today? Not, how do I rank? Not, would someone else approve? Not, do I look like I did 10 years ago? Simply, how do I feel? Maybe the answer is tired, maybe comfortable, maybe self-conscious. Be strong, maybe ordinary, maybe beautiful. All of those answers are allowed. Self-acceptance does not require permanent admiration. It requires the ability to remain on your own side. That phrase matters. Remain on your own side. You can dislike something about yourself without becoming your own enemy. You can want to improve your fitness without insulting your appearance. You can seek medical treatment without believing your body is defective. You can change your clothes without believing your body needs to earn the right to be seen. The same principle applies to sexuality. You may want to develop greater confidence, understand your responses, communicate more effectively, or seek professional help for a difficulty. None of these actions require the belief that you are broken. There is a difference between saying, I have something I want to understand, and saying, I am fundamentally wrong. The first creates curiosity, the second creates shame. Shame has a peculiar effect on intimacy. It encourages hiding, and hiding makes honest connection difficult. A person who feels ashamed of their body may avoid being seen. A person who feels ashamed of their desires may avoid discussing them. A person who feels ashamed of sexual difficulties may pretend everything is fine. A person who feels ashamed of inexperience may perform confidence rather than ask questions. The performance can become more exhausting than the original difficulty. This is why creating a psychologically safe environment matters. People learn more effectively when they are allowed to be imperfect. Relationships become more honest when people know that vulnerability will not automatically be punished. If I were speaking to a couple struggling with this, I would tell them to begin by changing the question. Instead of asking, how do we become more sexually confident? Ask, what makes it easier for each of us to feel safe enough to be present? Confidence may emerge from that. Presence is often more valuable than performance. Consider the difference between someone thinking, "How am I doing?" and someone thinking, "What am I noticing?" The first question directs attention toward evaluation. The second directs attention toward experience. This is where mindfulness can become useful, not as a magical cure, but as a practical skill of paying attention without immediately judging what you notice. You might notice tension. You might notice warmth. You might notice distraction. You might notice uncertainty. You might notice pleasure. You might notice that your mind has wandered to tomorrow's responsibilities. The goal is not to force a particular sensation, it is to notice what is happening. When you can notice without immediately criticizing, you create room for choice. And choice is essential. If you notice tension, perhaps you slow down. If you notice discomfort, perhaps you communicate. If you notice distraction, perhaps you pause and return your attention. If you notice that you do not want to continue, you can say so. If you notice enjoyment, you can allow yourself to experience it without turning it into a performance. This sounds simple, but many people have spent years doing the opposite. They have learned to override signals. They have learned to ignore fatigue. They have learned to smile when uncomfortable. They have learned to say yes because saying no feels dangerous. They have learned to treat another person's disappointment as evidence that they have done something wrong. Relearning how to listen to yourself can therefore be revolutionary. The body communicates continuously. The difficulty is that modern life teaches us to interrupt the conversation. Work, phones, notifications, deadlines, financial worries, family obligations, social comparison, constant stimulation. All of these compete for attention. When attention is fragmented throughout the day, it can be difficult to become fully present during moments of intimacy. This is not necessarily a relationship failure. It may be an attention problem. Think about what happens when someone has been answering messages for hours and then suddenly tries to have a meaningful conversation. Their body may be in the room, but their mind is still elsewhere. The same thing can happen with physical closeness. You cannot always command your nervous system to transition instantly from stress to relaxation. Sometimes there needs to be a bridge. A conversation, a shower, a walk, a meal, a few quiet minutes, a laugh, affection without expectation, time to put the day's demands down. That transition can matter. It is another reminder that intimacy does not exist separately from the rest of life. If someone is carrying unresolved anger, exhaustion, financial fear, or grief, those experiences may enter the room with them. The answer is not to blame the person. It is to recognize the whole human being. This is why financial well-being can influence relationships so strongly. Money anxiety can occupy enormous psychological space. Imagine a couple trying to reconnect after a long day, while one partner is silently calculating whether the mortgage payment will clear. Another is thinking about credit card debt. A third is worried about losing a job. A fourth is ashamed because they have hidden a purchase. Their difficulty with intimacy may not begin in the bedroom. It may begin in the financial system surrounding their lives. That does not mean money is responsible for everything, but it means we should not pretend that people can separate every part of themselves on command. Financial freedom principles can therefore support relational well-being indirectly. Create an emergency reserve appropriate to your circumstances. Understand your recurring expenses. Avoid taking on obligations simply to maintain an image. Be transparent with your partner about major financial realities. Distinguish needs from status-driven wants. Invest according to a sensible long-term plan, rather than chasing whatever happens to be fashionable. Develop skills that increase your ability to earn. Protect yourself against catastrophic risks where appropriate. And perhaps most importantly, avoid making your entire identity dependent upon your income. A person who believes, "I am successful only when I am earning more," may eventually carry that pressure into every part of life. Work becomes performance. Money becomes performance. Appearance becomes performance. Sex becomes performance. Even relaxation becomes performance. Soon there is nowhere to rest. A healthier life allows some experiences to exist without measurement. You can eat a meal without calculating its productivity. You can walk without tracking every step. You can talk without trying to win. You can touch without demanding an outcome. You can rest without proving that you deserve it. You can enjoy money without using it to prove your status. You can save without becoming obsessed with accumulation. This is not laziness. It is balance. One of the most important skills in adult life is knowing when optimization has stopped being useful. There is a point at which more analysis does not improve the decision. There is a point at which more exercise does not improve health. There is a point at which more work does not improve financial security. There is a point at which more reassurance does not improve confidence. There is a point at which more discussion becomes rumination. Wisdom includes recognizing the point of diminishing returns. This becomes especially relevant when people try to solve sexual concerns through constant monitoring. Suppose someone is worried about whether they will experience enough desire. Before intimacy, they check. During intimacy, they check. Afterward, they analyze. The experience becomes a three-part examination. What did I feel? Was it enough? What does it mean? Over time, the person may become more disconnected from spontaneous experience precisely because they are trying so hard to evaluate it. A more useful approach is to notice patterns over time rather than judge every individual moment. One evening tells you very little. A pattern across months may tell you something important. This is true in finance as well. One day in the market tells you very little about a long-term investment strategy. One expensive purchase tells you less than your overall spending pattern. One bad financial month does not necessarily define your financial future. Look at patterns. Patterns provide information. And information can guide action. Suppose Sophia notices that she feels much more comfortable and connected when she has slept well, has not been rushing, and has had some affectionate time with her partner earlier in the day. That is useful information. She can experiment with creating those conditions. She is no longer trying to force a feeling. She is learning what supports it. This is an important distinction. You cannot command desire, but you can influence the environment in which desire may become easier to access. You can reduce pressure. You can create time. You can communicate. You can attend to physical comfort. You can address relationship conflict. You can seek medical advice when appropriate. You can explore what you actually enjoy. You can protect privacy. You can reduce distractions. You can learn. None of these guarantees a particular outcome, and that is okay. A healthy approach to sexuality is not about guarantees. It is about responsiveness. You notice. You communicate. You adjust. You respect. You continue. Sometimes the answer is yes. Sometimes it is no. Sometimes it is not now. Sometimes it is, I don't know. I don't know is an underrated answer. It creates space. Many people believe they must immediately know what they want, but preferences can be discovered gradually. You can say, I'm not sure. Let's slow down. You can say, I know I don't want that. You can say, I think I'd like to explore this. You can say, I enjoyed that, but I don't want it every time. These statements are not signs of confusion, they are signs of communication. A partner who respects you will not require you to have a perfectly scripted response, and you should offer the same respect. One of the greatest mistakes in intimate relationships is treating another person's uncertainty as an obstacle that must be overcome. If someone is uncertain, the answer is not pressure. It is space. Consent requires freedom. Without freedom, agreement becomes difficult to interpret. This is why healthy intimacy is fundamentally connected to autonomy. You should be able to say yes. You should be able to say no. You should be able to change your mind. You should be able to ask questions. You should be able to stop. And your partner should be able to do the same. That does not make intimacy fragile. It makes it meaningful. A freely chosen yes carries something that a pressured yes cannot. It says, I am here because I want to be here. That is powerful. It also means that rejection is not necessarily an attack. Someone saying no to an experience is not automatically saying no to your worth as a human being. This can be emotionally difficult. Our minds often personalize rejection. We hear, "not tonight," and translate it into, "you are undesirable." But there are countless reasons a person may not want intimacy at a particular moment. Fatigue, stress, pain, distraction, emotional overload, hormonal changes, medication, relationship tension. Simply not wanting it. A mature response separates the event from the identity. I didn't get the response I hoped for, too different from I am worthless. This distinction protects both people. The person who says no does not have to carry responsibility for another person's entire self-esteem. The person who hears no can acknowledge disappointment without punishing the other person. That is emotional maturity. And emotional maturity is attractive because it creates safety. People are more likely to be honest when honesty does not trigger retaliation. This principle extends beyond sexuality. If an employee cannot tell a manager that a deadline is unrealistic, the organization loses information. If a child cannot tell a parent that something frightened them, the family loses information. If a partner cannot say that they are unhappy, the relationship loses information. If a person cannot admit they are financially overwhelmed, the household loses information. Silence does not remove problems. It removes visibility. And invisible problems are harder to solve. That is why I would encourage people to create environments where difficult information can survive. You want your partner to be able to say, "I'm worried." You want them to be able to say, "I don't like this." You want them to be able to say, "I'm confused." You want them to be able to say, "I'm not enjoying this." You want them to be able to say, "I need more." And you want yourself to be able to say those things too. The response matters. If the response is ridicule, anger, manipulation, or punishment, honesty will decrease. If the response is curiosity, even when the information is painful, honesty has a chance to increase. This is how trust develops, not because we always hear what we want, because we learn that reality can be spoken. Now consider what happens when people stop expecting themselves to be perfect. They become more playful. They can laugh when something awkward happens. They can try something new without assuming they must be experts. They can admit uncertainty. They can recover from mistakes. Humor can be surprisingly valuable in intimate relationships. Not humor that mocks vulnerability. Humor that reduces unnecessary pressure. Human bodies make strange noises. Plans fail. Timing is imperfect. People become distracted. Life interrupts. The more rigidly we demand perfection, the more disruptive ordinary human awkwardness becomes. If instead we can say, "Well, that was not what we expected," and laugh kindly, we create resilience. Playfulness is not the absence of seriousness. It is the ability to remain flexible. That flexibility can also help financially. A person who is financially rigid may become terrified whenever reality deviates from the plan. A more resilient person can adjust. Maybe the vacation needs to be postponed. Maybe a subscription needs to be canceled. Maybe the career plan needs to change. Maybe savings need to be rebuilt. Maybe an investment needs to be reconsidered based on new information. The goal is not to panic. The goal is to respond. A financial plan should provide direction, not imprison you. The same is true of relationship expectations. A relationship vision should provide values, not rigid scripts. You might value closeness. That does not mean every evening must look the same. You might value passion. That does not mean desire must always be spontaneous. You might value financial security. That does not mean you must eliminate every enjoyable expense. You might value independence. That does not mean you cannot depend on someone during difficult times. Healthy values are flexible enough to survive real life. This brings us to another powerful idea. Resilience is built through small experiences of adaptation. Every time you encounter a difficulty and respond thoughtfully, you gather evidence that you can handle difficulty. You do not need to know exactly what tomorrow will bring. You need confidence in your capacity to respond. That is a very different kind of confidence. It is not Nothing will go wrong. It is, if something goes wrong, I will look for the next responsible step. That principle can transform anxiety. Imagine a person worried about financial uncertainty. Instead of repeatedly checking investment prices, they create a realistic emergency plan. Instead of worrying about every possible expense, they identify the risks they can actually prepare for. Instead of trying to predict markets, they focus on long-term principles. Instead of comparing their progress with strangers online, they measure progress against their own goals. The anxiety may not disappear completely, but it has somewhere productive to go. The same is true of relationship anxiety. Instead of repeatedly asking, "Does my partner still love me?" a person can build communication habits, strengthen their independent life, learn emotional regulation, and discuss concerns directly. The goal is not to eliminate uncertainty. It is to make uncertainty tolerable. There will always be things you cannot know. You cannot know exactly how someone will feel next year. You cannot know exactly what your body will be like in 10 years. You cannot know exactly what the financial markets will do tomorrow. You cannot know exactly which opportunities will appear. But you can know your values. You can know your boundaries. You can know your current financial position. You can know what conversations need to happen. You can know what actions are available today. That is enough to begin. This is why I believe the most useful form of self-improvement is not the endless pursuit of an ideal self. It is increasing your ability to respond to reality. Learn to listen. Learn to pause. Learn to communicate. Learn to tolerate uncertainty. Learn to ask for help. Learn to make decisions. Learn to repair mistakes. Learn to manage money. Learn to care for your body. Learn to recognize when professional support is appropriate. These skills compound. Just as financial investments can compound over time, human capabilities can compound. One honest conversation can make the next one easier. One successful boundary can make future boundaries clearer. 1 month of intentional spending can make financial awareness more natural. One experience of being vulnerable without being rejected can increase willingness to be vulnerable again. This is why small steps matter. You do not need to transform your relationship overnight. You need to create the next healthy interaction. You do not need to become financially independent immediately. You need to make the next responsible financial decision. You do not need perfect body confidence. You need to stop treating your body as an enemy. You do not need to understand every aspect of your sexuality today. You need permission to remain curious. That word returns again and again. Curiosity. It may be one of the most underrated relationship skills. When curiosity disappears, assumptions take over. You stop asking, "What do you mean?" You start deciding what they mean. You stop asking, "What feels good to you now?" You assume you already know. You stop asking, "How are you experiencing our finances?" You assume your priorities are shared. You stop asking, "What has changed?" You assume nothing has. Curiosity keeps the door open. It says, "I know you, but I know that you are still becoming." That is perhaps the most respectful attitude one person can have toward another. Your partner is not a finished product. Neither are you. And because you are both changing, the relationship must remain capable of discovery. There will be moments when you rediscover attraction. Moments when you rediscover laughter. Moments when you rediscover affection. Moments when you discover a new preference. Moments when you realize that an old conflict was actually about something deeper. Moments when you realize that your financial goals have changed. Moments when you understand that what you thought you needed was not what you actually needed. Growth is not always about adding more. Sometimes growth is removing what no longer fits. An old expectation. An old fear. An unnecessary expense. A destructive habit. A false comparison. A role you never chose. A definition of success that belonged to someone else. Letting go can create space. And space matters. Without space, nothing new can develop. So, perhaps the question we should ask ourselves is not, "How can I become more impressive?" Perhaps it is, "What can I remove so that I can become more present?" Remove some pressure. Remove some secrecy. Remove some comparison. Remove some unnecessary financial obligations. Remove some assumptions. Remove some shame. Remove some distractions. What remains may be surprisingly valuable. Your actual body, your actual relationship, your actual financial life, your actual needs, your actual values. Your actual choices. Reality may not look like the fantasy. But reality is where a meaningful life can actually be built. And that is where Sophie eventually arrived. She still had days when she disliked her appearance. She still sometimes worried about aging. She still occasionally compared herself with other people. But she no longer treated those moments as instructions. A negative thought could appear without becoming a verdict. She could notice it and return to her life. Her partner noticed the difference. She was more relaxed, not because she had finally become perfectly confident, because she had stopped requiring confidence before allowing herself to participate. She began enjoying dinners without constantly checking how she looked. She accepted affection without immediately asking what it meant. She talked openly when something felt uncomfortable. She allowed herself to say no. She became more comfortable saying yes when she genuinely wanted to. Her life had not become perfect. It had become more inhabited. And that may be one of the most important changes a person can make. Stop watching your life from the outside. Enter it. Feel it. Question it. Shape it. Protect it. Enjoy it. And when something changes, do not immediately ask what is wrong with you. Ask what the change is trying to tell you. Sometimes it will tell you that you need rest. Sometimes that you need communication. Sometimes that you need medical support. Sometimes that you need a financial adjustment. Sometimes that you need a boundary. Sometimes that you need to grieve. Sometimes that you need to learn. And sometimes it will simply tell you that you are human. That answer is not a failure. It is the beginning of understanding. By the time people begin to understand themselves more clearly, they often discover a surprising truth. Knowing what you need is only the beginning. The harder part is learning how to communicate that need without turning it into a demand, and how to hear another person's need without experiencing it as a threat. This is where intimacy becomes an art of negotiation. Two people can love each other deeply and still want different things at different moments. They can have different energy levels, different histories, different sensitivities, different ideas about closeness, different attitudes toward money, different ways of responding to stress, and different definitions of what makes a life satisfying. The goal is not to erase those differences. The goal is to develop enough trust that differences can exist without automatically becoming battles. Think about a couple named Hannah and Elias. They had been together for 12 years and had become experts at anticipating one another's practical needs. Elias knew how Hannah took her coffee. Hannah knew which meetings made Elias anxious. They could finish each other's sentences when discussing family logistics. They knew who would pick up the groceries and who would remember birthdays. Yet there was one area where they had become strangely cautious. They rarely talked directly about intimacy. The silence had started innocently. Early in their relationship, neither wanted to seem demanding. Later, when responsibilities increased, there was less time. Then came the awkwardness of trying to restart conversations after months of avoidance. Eventually, both began interpreting the silence. Hannah thought, maybe he doesn't want me anymore. Elias thought, maybe she doesn't enjoy being close to me. Each interpretation made the next conversation harder. One night, Hannah finally said, I think we've become afraid to talk about us. Elias looked at her for a long moment. I think you're right. That sentence was small, but it opened a door. They did not immediately discuss every private detail of their relationship. They started with something simpler. What do you miss? Hannah answered first. I miss feeling that we had time for each other. Elias thought about it. I miss not feeling like every moment has to lead somewhere. Neither had expected that answer. Hannah had assumed he wanted more. Elias had assumed she wanted less. But what they actually needed was more freedom around closeness. They needed affection that did not automatically become a negotiation. They needed time together without a performance requirement. They needed to feel that intimacy could be playful, emotional, affectionate, quiet, or physical without having to follow a predetermined sequence. That realization changed their approach. They began creating small moments of connection without attaching an outcome to them. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they held each other. Sometimes they laughed. Sometimes they were affectionate and then simply went to sleep. Sometimes they wanted more. Sometimes they did not. The important thing was that they could communicate. This is a principle worth remembering. Intimacy grows when connection is allowed to exist without constant pressure for a particular result. Pressure narrows attention. Safety expands it. When people feel evaluated, they often become self-conscious. When they feel accepted, they can become more curious. That curiosity allows them to discover what they actually experience, instead of what they think they are supposed to experience. This is particularly important when desire changes over time. People sometimes treat desire as though it were a permanent personality trait. I'm a passionate person. I'm not a sexual person. My partner has always had a high drive. I've never been interested in that. But circumstances can change the experience. Stress can change it. Health can change it. Medication can change it. Hormonal transitions can change it. Relationship dynamics can change it. Sleep can change it. Confidence can change it. Grief can change it. Parenthood can change it. Work can change it. Aging can change it. None of this means that every change is harmless or that every difficulty should simply be accepted without investigation. Persistent pain, distressing changes, sexual dysfunction, medication effects, mood symptoms, or other health concerns may deserve evaluation by an appropriately qualified healthcare professional, but the first response does not need to be panic. It can be curiosity. What has changed? When did it begin? What else was happening at that time? What makes it better? What makes it harder? How am I feeling emotionally? How is my relationship functioning? Are there physical symptoms? Am I exhausted? Do I feel pressured? These questions can turn a vague fear into useful information, and useful information creates choices. One of the great mistakes people make is trying to solve a complex human problem with a single explanation. It must be hormones. It must be attraction. It must be stress. It must be age. It must be my partner. It must be me. Sometimes, several factors are operating simultaneously. Human beings are systems. A difficult day at work can affect mood. Mood can affect communication. Communication can affect connection. Connection can affect desire. A difficult financial month can increase anxiety. Anxiety can affect sleep. Poor sleep can affect energy. Low energy can affect intimacy. The chain can run in either direction. This is why blame is often less useful than mapping. Instead of asking, whose fault is this? Ask, what factors are contributing to this? That question moves the conversation from accusation to problem solving. The same principle is invaluable in financial life. A couple may discover that they are constantly arguing about money. It is tempting to say, you're irresponsible, but what if the real issue is unclear expectations? One person grew up believing that saving was the highest priority. The other grew up in a household where money was spent freely because tomorrow was uncertain. One sees a restaurant meal as a harmless pleasure. The other sees it as unnecessary leakage from the long-term plan. One believes financial security means owning a home. The other values flexibility and dislikes debt. Neither person necessarily has the complete truth. They have different histories. Money carries emotional meaning. For some people, money means safety. For others, freedom. For others, achievement. For others, love. For others, power. For others, relief from the deprivation they experienced growing up. That is why financial conversations are rarely only about numbers. When someone spends money impulsively, the transaction may be connected to emotion. When someone refuses to spend anything, fear may be involved. When someone hides purchases, shame may be involved. When someone constantly pursues higher income, insecurity or ambition may be involved. Numbers matter, but meaning matters too. A strong financial plan therefore begins with a shared understanding of what the money is for. What are you trying to protect? What are you trying to build? What experiences matter? What risks are unacceptable? What level of lifestyle is genuinely enough? What does freedom look like? These questions can change the entire conversation. Suppose Hannah and Elias decide that their goal is not to become wealthy by some arbitrary standard. They want flexibility. They want the ability to take time off during family emergencies. They want to avoid high-interest debt. They want to invest for the future. They want to travel occasionally without creating long-term financial damage. They want to maintain some individual spending freedom while being transparent about major obligations. Once the goal is clear, the numbers become easier to organize. They can create a budget. They can determine how much needs to be saved. They can establish appropriate emergency reserves. They can review debt. They can decide how much to invest. They can distinguish long-term priorities from temporary wants. The same thing happened in their relationship. Once they understood that their goal was not to reproduce some idealized version of intimacy, but to create connection that felt safe and mutually chosen, they could stop chasing an imaginary standard. This is what values do. They provide direction when circumstances change. A value is not a rigid rule. It is a compass. If you value intimacy, you may need to create time for connection. If you value autonomy, you may need to protect individual space. If you value financial freedom, you may need to resist lifestyle inflation. If you value health, you may need to take symptoms seriously. If you value honesty, you may need to have uncomfortable conversations. The value tells you where to go. The specific behavior may change. There is another dimension to intimacy that deserves attention. Expectations. Expectations can be useful. They help us coordinate our lives. But hidden expectations can become traps. Imagine someone thinking, if my partner loves me, they should automatically know what I need. That sounds romantic. It is also unrealistic. No person can reliably read another person's mind. Yet many relationships operate according to this invisible rule. I shouldn't have to ask. If they cared, they would know. If they loved me, they would want the same things. These beliefs create disappointment because they turn ordinary human difference into evidence of emotional failure. A healthier approach is explicit communication. I would really like more affection. I need some time alone. I would like us to discuss our finances. I feel disconnected. I would enjoy spending an evening together. I don't want to continue this. These statements give another person something they can actually respond to. A partner cannot reliably meet a need that has never been expressed, and expressing a need does not guarantee that it will be met. That is an important distinction. Communication is not a control mechanism. You can ask. The other person can answer. You can negotiate. They can negotiate. Sometimes you reach agreement. Sometimes you compromise. Sometimes you accept a difference. Sometimes you realize the difference is too large to sustain. Respect requires allowing the other person to remain separate. This is why consent and autonomy are deeply connected. Healthy intimacy does not mean persuading someone until they agree. It means creating enough safety that their answer can genuinely be their own. If someone says no, disappointment may be real, but disappointment is not permission to pressure. If someone says yes, that does not create a permanent obligation for the future. Every intimate encounter exists in its own context. People can change their minds. Bodies can change their responses. Emotions can shift. A respectful relationship makes room for that. The ability to stop is part of the ability to choose. And the ability to choose is part of what makes intimacy meaningful. This idea can be difficult for people who have been taught that relationships involve entitlement. Some believe that commitment means permanent access to another person's attention, affection, body, time, or money. It does not. Commitment means choosing the relationship. It does not erase individuality. In fact, commitment becomes more meaningful when both people remain free enough to choose it. That freedom includes financial freedom. If one person controls all the money and the other has no realistic access to resources, the relationship may contain a dangerous power imbalance. Healthy financial arrangements should consider transparency, access, safety, and fairness. Exact arrangements differ between couples, and circumstances such as caregiving, disability, income differences, or career choices can make equal and fair look different. But financial control should never be confused with love. A person should not be financially trapped as a condition of being in a relationship. This is why developing financial capability is so valuable. Know how your accounts work. Know your debts. Know your income. Know your recurring expenses. Understand basic investing principles. Build an emergency cushion appropriate to your situation. Maintain important financial records. Understand insurance and other protections relevant to your circumstances. Develop earning capacity. And if you share finances with someone, establish clear agreements. Financial literacy is not merely a wealth-building skill, it is a self-protection skill. The same can be said of sexual health literacy. Know how your body works. Understand contraception and pregnancy considerations relevant to you. Understand sexually transmitted infection prevention and testing. Know that persistent pain or significant changes deserve appropriate medical attention. Understand that emotional well-being can influence sexual experience. Know that consent is ongoing. Know that asking questions is not embarrassing. Knowledge reduces unnecessary fear, but knowledge does not eliminate uncertainty. There will still be situations in which you do not know what to do. That is normal. The answer may be to seek qualified professional support. A therapist may help with relationship patterns. A physician or other qualified healthcare professional may help with medical concerns. A financial professional may help with complex financial planning. There is no virtue in suffering unnecessarily simply because you believe you should solve everything alone. Self-reliance is valuable. Knowing when to seek expertise is also a form of self-reliance, but you are responsible for getting appropriate help when the problem exceeds what you can reasonably handle. That principle applies to money too. You would not necessarily repair a complicated electrical system without training. Why assume every complex financial, medical, or psychological problem should be handled without expert guidance? Learning when to ask for help is part of becoming capable, and capability creates freedom. This brings us to a concept that can transform how we think about both intimacy and financial life. Margin. Margin is the space between what is demanded and what is available. If every dollar is already committed, there is no financial margin. If every hour is already scheduled, there is no time margin. If every emotional resource is already consumed, there is no psychological margin. If every moment of physical affection carries an expectation, there is no relational margin. Without margin, small disruptions become crises. A flat tire becomes a financial emergency. A stressful week becomes a relationship catastrophe. A missed opportunity for intimacy becomes evidence that something is wrong. But with margin, life has room to breathe. An emergency fund creates financial margin. A realistic schedule creates time margin. Healthy boundaries create emotional margin. Unpressured affection creates relational margin. Sleep creates physical margin. Margin is not wasted space. It is resilience. This is one reason financial freedom is so powerful. It is not merely about having more money. It is about creating enough flexibility that one unexpected event does not control your entire life. The same is true of relationships. A resilient relationship has enough emotional margin to survive a difficult week. A resilient person has enough self-respect to survive someone else's disappointment. A resilient couple has enough trust to survive an awkward conversation. A resilient financial system has enough reserves to survive an unexpected expense. The principle is simple. Build margin before you desperately need it. Do not wait for burnout before protecting rest. Do not wait for debt to become overwhelming Before examining spending. Do not wait for resentment to explode before discussing needs. Do not wait for a medical crisis before paying attention to persistent symptoms. Small preventive actions are often easier than emergency repairs. This is not glamorous advice, but good lives are often built from unglamorous habits. Saving automatically, having difficult conversations, going to bed on time, keeping promises, reviewing accounts, asking for clarification, saying no, saying thank you, repairing mistakes. Taking breaks. Learning. Repeating. People sometimes want to break through, but most sustainable change is built through repetition. There is a motivational principle I would put at the center of this journey. Do not confuse a dramatic moment with meaningful progress. Progress is what becomes repeatable. A dramatic declaration can feel powerful. A repeatable habit is powerful. A passionate conversation can feel transformative. A respectful conversation repeated over months is transformative. A sudden financial restriction may save money for a few weeks. A sustainable spending system can change an entire future. A burst of confidence can feel wonderful. A habit of self-respect can survive bad days. This is why we should stop measuring growth only by how inspired we feel. Measure what you repeatedly do. If you say you value your relationship, how do you behave when you are tired? If you say you value financial freedom, what happens when you receive unexpected income? If you say you value health, what happens when you notice a persistent concern? If you say you value honesty, what happens when the truth is inconvenient? Values become real through behavior, and behavior becomes easier when the environment supports it. Hannah and Elias eventually redesigned parts of their routine. They protected some evenings from unnecessary obligations. They talked about money at a predictable time instead of during arguments. They created individual space. They practiced saying what they wanted without assuming the other person should already know. They also learned to tolerate conversations that did not end with immediate solutions. That last part was difficult. Elias wanted closure. Hannah wanted reassurance. Sometimes neither could provide exactly what the other wanted, but they discovered that a conversation could be successful even if it ended with, "We need to think about this and continue tomorrow." Not every problem needs to be solved in one sitting. Some need time, some need information, some need professional support, some need experimentation, some need acceptance, some need a decision. Wisdom lies in knowing which is which. This applies to desire too. Suppose a person notices a persistent change in sexual functioning. The answer is not necessarily to panic. It may be appropriate to track the pattern, consider context, review medications with a clinician where relevant, discuss concerns with a partner, and seek healthcare evaluation if needed. A problem becomes less frightening when you can describe it accurately. What is happening? When does it happen? How often? Under what conditions? What has changed? What have I already tried? This is the language of investigation. Investigation replaces shame with information. And information can be empowering. Imagine someone who has always thought, "My body doesn't work." Now they can say, "I have noticed a consistent change over the last 6 months, especially during periods of high stress, and I would like to understand why." That sentence contains agency. It does not promise an easy answer, but it creates a path. The same transformation can happen with money. "I am terrible with money" becomes, "My spending has exceeded my planned amount for the last 4 months, mostly because of 3 recurring categories. I am going to examine them and decide what to change." That is a problem. Problems can be addressed. Labels feel permanent. Descriptions create options. This is why language matters. The words we use to describe ourselves become frameworks through which we interpret experience. I'm broken. I'm undesirable. I'm financially hopeless. I'm bad at relationships. These statements compress complicated situations into identities. Try, "I'm struggling with this." "I'm learning." "This pattern ain't working." "I need more information." "I need support." "I can make a different choice." These statements leave the future open. The future matters. A difficult present does not automatically predict a permanent future. A relationship can change. A financial situation can improve. A person's confidence can grow. A body can receive care. A communication pattern can be repaired. A person can learn. This does not mean everything can be fixed. Some losses are permanent. Some relationships should end. Some health conditions require long-term management. Some financial mistakes have lasting consequences. Hope is not denial. Hope is the belief that meaningful action remains possible. That distinction keeps hope grounded. And grounded hope is more useful than fantasy. Fantasy says, everything will work out perfectly. Grounded hope says, I may not control the outcome, but I can control how honestly and responsibly I respond. That is enough. You do not need certainty to act. You need a next step. When Hannah felt disconnected, she could initiate a conversation. When Elias felt rejected, he could communicate rather than withdraw. When they faced financial stress, they could look at the numbers rather than avoid them. When they did not understand something, they could seek information. When they disagreed, they could negotiate. When they made mistakes, they could repair. This is what adult intimacy looks like. Not endless chemistry, not perfect communication, not permanent certainty. Responsibility combined with tenderness, and perhaps that is the real meaning of emotional maturity. You learn to hold to truths at the same time. I love you, and I need a boundary. I am disappointed, and I respect your decision. I want more closeness, and I do not want to pressure you. I want financial security, and I also want to enjoy my life. I am worried, and I can still take the next step. I am not where I want to be, and I can still appreciate where I am. I have things to improve, and I am still worthy of respect. These are not contradictions. They are complexity. Human beings are complex. The goal is not to simplify ourselves until we become easy to understand. The goal is to become honest enough to understand ourselves better, and that requires patience. You will misunderstand yourself sometimes. You will change your mind. You will discover preferences you did not know you had. You will discover boundaries you did not know you needed. You will make financial decisions you later reconsider. You will enter relationships with expectations that reality challenges. That is not failure. It is learning. The most dangerous response to learning is shame. Shame says, I should have known. Wisdom says, now I know more. Use the new information. Adjust. Continue. This is how people grow. And this is how financial freedom grows too. You do not need to know everything before you begin saving. You do not need a perfect income before learning to manage money. You do not need to eliminate every mistake before creating a plan. Start with what you know. Improve the system as you learn. The same principle applies to intimacy. You do not need perfect communication before beginning an honest conversation. Begin. Listen. Adjust. Try again. Relationships, like financial plans, should be living systems. They require periodic review. What worked before may no longer work. What once felt generous may now feel exhausting. What once felt secure may now feel restrictive. What once felt exciting may now feel routine. That does not mean the past was wrong. It means the present is different. One of the greatest forms of maturity is the willingness to update your understanding. You can say, this used to work for us, but it doesn't anymore. I used to think I needed this, but I've learned something different. I've changed. You're changing. We need to talk about what comes next. Those sentences can feel frightening, but they are also signs of life. A stagnant relationship may look peaceful from the outside because nobody is saying anything. A living relationship contains movement, questions. Adjustments. Surprises. Repair. Discovery. And sometimes difficult decisions. The goal is not to avoid difficulty. It is to become capable of meeting difficulty without losing yourself. That is perhaps the most important kind of freedom. Financial freedom is not simply having enough money. Relational freedom is not simply being without commitment. Personal freedom is not simply doing whatever you want. Freedom is having the capacity to make choices aligned with your values while accepting the responsibilities those choices require. If you want financial freedom, Responsibility comes with it, if you want intimacy. Vulnerability comes with it, if you want autonomy. Self-management comes with it, if you want meaningful relationships. Communication comes with them. There is no freedom without responsibility. But there is also no meaningful responsibility without choice. That is why autonomy and connection belong together. You are allowed to be your own person, and you are allowed to belong. You can have boundaries and tenderness. You can have independence and commitment. You can have ambition and rest. You can have financial discipline and enjoyment. You can have sexual curiosity and caution. You can have confidence and uncertainty. A mature life does not force you to choose one side forever. It teaches you how to hold both. And when you learn that, something changes. You stop searching for the perfect formula. You begin developing judgment. You stop asking, what is the one rule everyone should follow? You ask, what is true here? For these people, in this context, at this moment, that question is harder. It is also more human. And perhaps that is where real freedom begins. Not in having every answer, but in becoming capable of asking better questions. There comes a point in every meaningful relationship when knowledge is no longer enough. You can understand communication. You can know the importance of consent. You can recognize the effects of stress. You can understand that desire changes. You can even know what your financial priorities are. And still, when life becomes difficult, knowing what to do and actually doing it can feel like two entirely different things. This is where practice begins. Real intimacy is not created by memorizing the right ideas. It is created when those ideas become behavior, when curiosity replaces accusation, when listening replaces defensiveness, when honesty replaces guessing, and when two people learn that connection is something they actively create rather than something they passively receive. Consider a fictional couple named Laura and James. They had reached a stage in their relationship where nothing was catastrophically wrong, yet neither felt entirely satisfied. There was no dramatic betrayal, no enormous crisis, no single event they could point to and say, that is when everything changed. Instead, there had been 1,000 small moments of disconnection, a conversation interrupted by a phone, an evening sacrificed to work, a concern postponed, a financial decision made without discussion, a moment of affection that one person interpreted differently from the other, a disappointment swallowed because it seemed too small to mention. Nothing seemed serious enough to discuss. Together, those small things became serious. Laura eventually said, I don't think we have a terrible relationship. I think we've stopped paying attention to it. James knew immediately that she was right. That sentence captures something important about relationships. Neglect rarely announces itself. It accumulates quietly. A garden does not become overgrown in one afternoon. A financial account does not usually become disorganized because of one purchase. A body does not become exhausted because of one late night. A relationship does not become distant because of one missed conversation. Patterns develop, and patterns can be changed. The first step is noticing them without turning observation into blame. Laura and James decided to experiment with something simple. Once a week, they would sit together without phones and ask each other 3 questions. What felt good between us this week? What felt difficult? What is one thing you'd like more of next week? They were surprised by how much information emerged. Sometimes the answers were practical, more help around the house, less last-minute scheduling. Let's talk about the vacation budget. Sometimes they were emotional. I miss you. I've been stressed. I've been feeling insecure. Sometimes they involved intimacy. I'd like more affection without expectations. I'd like us to make more time for closeness. I've been distracted lately. The questions did not solve everything. They did something more important. They prevented small issues from disappearing into silence. This is one of the most practical principles of a healthy relationship. Attention is a form of care. What you repeatedly pay attention to tends to improve. What you consistently ignore tends to accumulate. This is true of intimacy. It is true of health. It is true of money. It is true of almost every important area of life. If you never look at your finances, uncertainty grows. If you never discuss resentment, distance grows. If you never examine your physical health, concerns may remain unnoticed. If you never ask what your partner is experiencing, assumptions become stronger. Attention does not guarantee a good outcome, but inattention guarantees that you will eventually have less information. And information is the raw material of wise decisions. This is why I would encourage anyone listening to develop a habit of gentle review, not obsessive monitoring. Review. There is a difference. Monitoring says, "Is everything okay right now?" Review says, "What patterns have emerged over time?" Monitoring can increase anxiety. Review can increase understanding. Suppose someone experiences a night when they do not feel much desire. Monitoring might lead them to panic. What does this mean? Is something wrong? Has everything changed? A thoughtful review asks different questions. Has this happened repeatedly? What was going on in my life? Was I tired? Was I stressed? Was there unresolved conflict? Have I noticed any physical changes? Is this distressing to me? That last question matters. Not every variation needs to become a problem. Human beings fluctuate. The existence of variation is not evidence of dysfunction. A person can have a week of low desire without needing to construct a story about their entire identity. At the same time, if a change is persistent, distressing, painful, or accompanied by other symptoms, it deserves attention and potentially professional evaluation. This balance is important. Do not catastrophize ordinary variation. Do not dismiss persistent distress. Learn the difference. The same principle applies to finances. A single expensive month does not necessarily mean you are financially irresponsible. But if expenses consistently exceed income, that is a pattern worth addressing. One market decline does not necessarily mean an investment strategy is failing. But if your portfolio is consistently misaligned with your goals, time horizon, or risk tolerance, review is appropriate. One argument does not mean a relationship is unhealthy, but repeated contempt, manipulation, coercion, or unresolved conflict should not be dismissed as just relationships. Patterns matter. This is why maturity is less about reacting to individual events and more about recognizing patterns without exaggerating them. There is another pattern that can quietly damage intimacy: the belief that one partner is responsible for creating the other's emotional state. This can appear romantic at first. You make me happy. But if taken literally, it becomes a burden no person can carry. Your partner can contribute to your happiness. They cannot be responsible for it entirely. You remain responsible for learning how to regulate your emotions, communicate your needs, maintain meaningful friendships, pursue interests, care for your health, and seek support when necessary. This does not mean becoming emotionally isolated. Quite the opposite. Healthy interdependence means I can stand on my own, and I can also lean on you. Dependency says, without you, I cannot function. Avoidance says, I don't need anyone. Interdependence says, we are separate people who choose to support each other. That distinction can transform a relationship. It also has a financial parallel. A healthy partnership can involve shared financial goals, but each person should ideally understand the financial system well enough not to be completely helpless if circumstances change. Know where accounts are. Understand major debts and obligations. Know how household bills are paid. Keep important records accessible. Understand the broad investment strategy. Know what insurance coverage exists. Have some awareness of the family's financial plan. This is not about distrusting a partner. It is about capability. Love is not a substitute for financial literacy. Trust is not a substitute for understanding. The same principle applies to health. You can trust your partner and still understand your own body. You can trust your doctor and still ask questions. You can trust a financial advisor and still understand the basic logic of your plan. Healthy trust includes informed participation, and informed participation increases freedom. This is one of the financial freedom principles I would emphasize most strongly. Never outsource your entire understanding of the systems that determine your freedom. You do not have to become an expert in everything, but you should understand enough to ask intelligent questions. If someone manages your investments, understand the fees, broad strategy, risks, and purpose. If someone handles the household budget, know the major numbers. If a partner handles most financial administration, maintain access to essential information. If you are unsure, learn. The goal is not control. The goal is resilience. The same principle applies to sexual well-being. Do not assume your partner knows your body better than you do. Do not assume cultural myths are medical facts. Do not assume something is wrong because your experience differs from a fictional standard. Do not assume a persistent problem will disappear simply because you are embarrassed to discuss it. Learn, ask, seek qualified information. Then make decisions based on reality rather than shame. Shame thrives in ignorance. Knowledge weakens it. This is why education can be liberating. When people understand that sexual responses vary, they may stop interpreting every fluctuation as failure. When they understand that stress can influence desire, they may stop blaming their partner. When they understand that bodies change, they may become less frightened by normal transitions. When they understand that pain is not something they are obligated to tolerate, they may seek appropriate medical help. When they understand that consent is ongoing, they may communicate more clearly. Knowledge does not solve every problem, but it gives people a better map. And maps matter. Imagine trying to navigate a new city without knowing where you are. Every turn feels uncertain. Now imagine having a map. The city has not changed, but your ability to move through it has. Sexual well-being can be similar. The body is complex. Relationships are complex. Emotions are complex. But complexity becomes less frightening when we have language for it. This is why vocabulary matters. A person who can say, "I feel pressured," has more options than someone who can only think something is wrong. A person who can say, "I need affection" without escalation has more options than someone who simply withdraws. A person who can say, "I'm experiencing persistent discomfort" is more likely to seek appropriate care than someone who thinks they must endure it silently. A person who can say, "I'm anxious about our finances" can begin a conversation. Language converts vague distress into discussable information, and once something is discussable, it can be negotiated. This is where couples often discover that the problem was not necessarily their difference. The problem was their inability to talk about the difference. Imagine two people with different preferences. One prefers more physical affection, the other prefers less frequent physical contact. If they believe there must be one correct answer, one person must lose. But what if they approach the issue as a design problem? When does each person feel most comfortable? What kinds of affection are welcome? What kinds are not? Are there forms of closeness they both enjoy? Can they create rituals of affection that do not imply obligation? Can they communicate when they want more? Can they communicate when they want space? Can they respect a no without withdrawing emotionally? Can they say yes without fearing that it will create a future expectation? These questions create possibilities, not guarantees. Possibilities. And relationships need possibilities. A rigid relationship has only two options: compliance or conflict. A flexible relationship can generate alternatives. That flexibility is a form of intelligence. Sexual intelligence, relational intelligence, and financial intelligence all share a common foundation. The ability to gather information, understand context, communicate clearly, and make choices consistent with values. That is why these subjects belong together more naturally than we might first assume. A financially intelligent person does not ask, "How can I buy the most?" They ask, how can I use limited resources to create the life I value? A relationally intelligent person does not ask, how can I get my partner to behave the way I want? They ask, how can we create a relationship in which both people can be honest and respected? A sexually intelligent person does not ask, how can I perform perfectly? They ask, how can I understand my body, communicate with my partner, respect boundaries, and cultivate experiences that are mutually wanted and meaningful? In all three cases, the question moves from performance to purpose. Purpose is powerful. Without purpose, optimization becomes endless. You can always earn more, spend more, save more, exercise more, improve your appearance more, seek more validation, but more is not automatically better. A person can have an impressive income and a miserable life. A person can have a beautiful body and feel disconnected from it. A couple can appear passionate and feel lonely. A person can accumulate wealth while accumulating no freedom. The goal is not maximum achievement. It is meaningful alignment that requires defining enough. What is enough money? What is enough work? What is enough activity? What is enough socializing? What is enough solitude? What is enough intimacy? There may not be a universal answer, but asking the question can prevent endless chasing. Financial freedom is particularly vulnerable to the more trap. People say, I'll be happy when I earn this much. Then they reach it. The target moves. I'll feel secure when I have this much saved. They reach it. The target moves again. I'll finally relax when I can afford this lifestyle. Then the lifestyle expands. This is lifestyle inflation. But at a psychological level, it is also expectation inflation. The finish line keeps moving. A better strategy is to identify specific forms of freedom. Maybe you want 6 months of essential expenses in appropriate reserves. Maybe you want to eliminate high-interest consumer debt. Maybe you want enough investments that work becomes more optional later in life. Maybe you want the ability to take several months away from work if necessary. Maybe you want to support your children. Maybe you want to retire at a particular age. The goal becomes concrete. Money becomes a tool, not a scoreboard. This is also useful in relationships. Instead of saying, we need a better sex life, define what that means. More affection, more communication, less pressure, more privacy, more time addressing pain, seeking professional help, more playfulness, better understanding of each other's preferences. The vague goal becomes specific. Specificity makes action possible. This does not mean turning intimacy into a project management exercise. Quite the opposite. The goal is to remove unnecessary confusion so that genuine connection has more room. A relationship can become overly procedural too. Did we complete our weekly intimacy target? Did we meet the goal? Did we perform correctly? That recreates the very pressure we are trying to reduce. Metrics are useful for certain financial decisions. They are not a substitute for human experience. A budget can tell you what you spent. It cannot tell you whether the spending made your life meaningful. A relationship conversation can tell you what your partner said. It cannot automatically tell you what they felt. Numbers and words are tools. Judgment remains necessary. This is why wisdom cannot be reduced to formulas. There will always be context, and context is where compassion becomes important. Suppose your partner is less interested in intimacy during an exhausting period of caregiving. A rigid interpretation says, this is a relationship problem. A contextual interpretation asks, what is this person carrying? Suppose your partner makes an unusually large purchase after years of deprivation. A rigid interpretation says, they are irresponsible. A contextual interpretation asks, what emotional meaning does spending have for them? Understanding context does not mean excusing harmful behavior. It means understanding before responding. You can understand why someone spends impulsively and still establish a boundary. You can understand why someone withdraws and still ask for communication. You can understand someone's fear and still refuse coercion. Compassion and boundaries can coexist. This is another mature truth. Asterisk asterisk understanding a behavior does not require approving it. Asterisk asterisk that principle is valuable everywhere. You can understand why someone is angry without accepting abuse. You can understand why someone is financially stressed without allowing them to hide debts. You can understand why someone is insecure without allowing them to control your choices. You can understand why a partner is struggling with desire without assuming responsibility for fixing it. You can be compassionate without becoming responsible for everything. This is where boundaries protect compassion from turning into self-erasure. A person who constantly sacrifices their needs may eventually become resentful. Resentment often contains a hidden sentence. I kept giving what I never freely agreed to give. The solution is not to stop caring. It is to communicate earlier. I can help, but I cannot do all of it. I want to support you, but I also need rest. I can contribute this amount financially, but I cannot take on that debt. I love you, but I am not comfortable with this. Boundaries spoken earlier usually kinder than boundaries enforced after resentment has exploded. That is why small honesty is so valuable. You do not need to wait until you are furious to say something matters. Say it when it is still manageable. This is a principle worth carrying into every area of life. Asterisk asterisk address small problems while they are still small enough to discuss. Asterisk asterisk financially, that might mean reviewing a subscription before it becomes a year's worth of wasted spending. Relationally, it might mean mentioning disconnection before months of resentment accumulate. Health-wise, it might mean discussing a persistent concern rather than waiting until fear becomes overwhelming. Emotionally, it might mean admitting I'm struggling before you reach a breaking point. Prevention is rarely dramatic, but prevention is powerful. Another powerful practice is gratitude. Not force positivity, not pretending difficulties do not exist. Gratitude is attention directed toward what is working. Laura and James began ending their weekly conversations by naming one thing they appreciated about each other. At first, it felt awkward, then it became natural. I appreciated that you handled dinner when I was exhausted. I appreciated that you listened without interrupting. I appreciated the way you made me laugh. I appreciated that you told me the truth. I appreciated that you respected my boundary. These statements changed the emotional atmosphere. The relationship still had problems, but problems were no longer the only things receiving attention. This matters because the human mind is naturally sensitive to threats. We notice what is wrong quickly. That can be useful for survival, but relationships need deliberate attention to what is right. The same is true financially. If you only look at what you lack, wealth may never feel like enough. Notice what your money already accomplishes. It provides shelter. Food. Transportation. Education. Healthcare. Experiences. Support. Future options. Security. Perhaps not all of these are present in everyone's situation, and financial hardship can be very real. Gratitude should never be used to shame someone for struggling, but when circumstances allow, recognizing what is already working can reduce the psychological pressure to constantly consume more. Financial freedom requires both discipline and contentment. Discipline without contentment can become obsession. Contentment without discipline can become stagnation. Together, they create balance. The same is true of intimacy. Curiosity without boundaries can become chaos. Boundaries without vulnerability can become isolation. Together, they create healthy openness. This is why maturity often looks like balance rather than extremes. You can save and spend, work and rest. Connect and separate, speak and listen. Lead and compromise, explore and pause. Want more and appreciate enough. The ability to move between these states is a kind of flexibility. And flexibility is resilience. Life will eventually challenge every rigid plan. The body will change. The relationship will change. The job will change. The market will change. The family will change. Your priorities will change. A rigid identity says, "This is who I am." A resilient identity says, "This is what matters to me, and I can adapt how I express it." That distinction becomes especially important as people age. Some people fear that aging means the end of intimacy. Others fear that changes in the body mean the end of desirability. But aging can also create opportunities for deeper self-knowledge. You may know what you like more clearly. You may be less interested in impressing others. You may communicate boundaries more confidently. You may have a greater appreciation for emotional connection. You may understand that intimacy is much larger than any single physical response. There can be grief in aging. There can also be freedom. The freedom to stop performing for an imaginary audience. The freedom to stop chasing standards that were never realistic. The freedom to focus on connection instead of comparison. The freedom to value experience over appearance. This is not an argument against caring about health or appearance. It isn't. Argument against making appearance the foundation of worth. You can care for your body because you value it. You do not need to hate it into submission. Exercise can be an expression of care. Nutrition can be an expression of care. Medical treatment can be an expression of care. Rest can be an expression of care. Sexual health can be an expression of care. Financial planning can be an expression of care for your future self. This changes the emotional tone of self-improvement. Instead of asking, "How can I make myself acceptable?" ask, "How can I care for the person I am responsible for living with every day?" Yourself. That person deserves your attention. Not because you are perfect, because you are human, and you will spend your entire life inside your own mind and body. Learning to become a safe place for yourself may be one of the greatest investments you can make. It means learning how to speak to yourself after a mistake. Learning how to rest without guilt. Learning how to recognize when you need help. Learning how to forgive yourself without avoiding responsibility. Learning how to say no. Learning how to accept compliments without arguing. Learning how to accept imperfection without giving up. Financially, it means learning how to recover from mistakes rather than declaring yourself permanently incapable. Maybe you accumulated debt. You can examine it. Maybe you invested poorly. You can learn. Maybe you spent years without saving. You can begin. Maybe your financial situation is genuinely difficult. You can seek support and identify what is within your control. A mistake is an event. It does not have to become an identity. The same is true in relationships. A bad conversation does not have to define the relationship. A period of disconnection does not necessarily mean the connection is gone forever. A misunderstanding can become an opportunity to learn how the other person experiences you. Repair can create deeper understanding than never having conflict at all. This does not romanticize harmful relationships. If there is coercion, abuse, violence, manipulation, or serious financial control, safety takes priority. A person should not be expected to communicate their way through abuse or remain in danger to prove commitment. Healthy relationships require mutual respect. Without it, other techniques become secondary. That is why the foundation must always be dignity. Your partner's dignity. Your dignity. The dignity of saying yes. The dignity of saying no. The dignity of asking for help. The dignity of changing your mind. The dignity of having financial information. The dignity of having your body treated as your own. When dignity is present, intimacy becomes more than physical closeness. It becomes recognition. I see you. I hear you. I know you are separate from me. I respect your choices. I want to understand you. I will tell you what is true for me. That kind of relationship can survive change, because it is not built on pretending that change will never happen. Laura and James eventually realized that their relationship had not needed a dramatic rescue. It needed regular attention. They had been waiting for a crisis before taking their connection seriously. Now they treated connection as something worth maintaining before a crisis arrived. They also changed their financial habits. They created shared goals. They automated appropriate savings. They reviewed expenses. They discussed major purchases. They kept some room for individual choices. They stopped using spending as a substitute for emotional reassurance. And perhaps most importantly, they stopped treating financial progress as proof of personal worth. Their home did not become a showroom. Their relationship did not become a fantasy. Their lives became more intentional. That word captures so much. Intentional. Not perfect. Not optimized. Intentional. You know why you are doing what you are doing. You understand the trade-offs. You accept that every choice has a cost. You choose anyway. That is adult freedom. Every financial decision involves trade-offs. Every relationship decision involves trade-offs. Every lifestyle involves trade-offs. You cannot maximize everything simultaneously. More work may mean less free time. More spending may mean less saving. More independence may mean less spontaneous togetherness. More togetherness may mean less solitude. More certainty may mean less exploration. More novelty may mean less predictability. Wisdom is not eliminating trade-offs. It is choosing the trade-offs you can live with. And choosing consciously. This is why the question, "What do I want?" is incomplete. A better question is, "What am I willing to prioritize?" Priorities require sacrifice. If financial freedom matters, perhaps you choose not to spend every raise. If health matters, perhaps you protect sleep. If intimacy matters, perhaps you protect time together. If independence matters, perhaps you maintain individual interests. If honesty matters, perhaps you accept uncomfortable conversations. The sacrifice does not mean the goal is wrong. It means the goal is real. Real goals cost something, but they can also give something back. Financial discipline can give freedom. Relationship honesty can give trust. Boundaries can give peace. Self-knowledge can give confidence. Curiosity can give discovery. And attention can give presence. There is a final lesson I want to leave within this part of the journey. Do not wait until you feel completely ready. You may never feel completely ready. The conversation you need to have may make you nervous. The financial review you have been avoiding may reveal uncomfortable numbers. The medical appointment you have postponed may feel embarrassing. The boundary you need to establish may disappoint someone. The change you need to make may disrupt your routine. Courage does not require comfort first. It requires a reason strong enough to act despite discomfort. Choose the reason. Maybe it is your health. Maybe your relationship. Maybe your future. Maybe your freedom. Maybe your peace. Maybe the person you want to become. Then take one step. Not 10. 1. Make the conversation. Open the account statement. Write down the debt. Ask the question. Say the boundary. Schedule the appointment. Take the walk. Turn off the phone. Sit beside the person you love. Listen. The next step becomes visible after the first. This is how complicated lives are changed. Not through one extraordinary moment, through ordinary courage repeated. And perhaps that is the most practical definition of freedom I can offer you. Freedom is not the absence of uncertainty. It is the growing confidence that you can meet uncertainty without abandoning yourself. When you understand that, relationships become less frightening. Money becomes less mysterious. Bodies become less like enemies. Change becomes less like a catastrophe. And the future becomes something you do not have to predict perfectly. It becomes something you can participate in. You can enter it with curiosity. You can enter it with preparation. You can enter it with boundaries. You can enter it with compassion. You can enter it with financial discipline. You can enter it with an open mind. And most importantly, you can enter it as yourself. Perhaps the deepest lesson is this. A fulfilling intimate life is not something you finally achieve and then keep forever. It is something you learn to participate in. It changes as you change. Your body changes. Your circumstances change. Your relationship changes. Your priorities change. The person you were at 20 may not want the same things at 40. And the person you are at 40 may discover possibilities you could not imagine at 20. Growth does not invalidate the past. It simply means that you are alive enough to keep learning. Imagine standing at the edge of a long road after spending years believing that somewhere ahead there is a destination called confidence. You imagine that one day you will arrive. You will finally understand your body. You will finally stop worrying about how you look. You will finally know exactly what your partner wants. You will finally have enough money. You will finally become completely secure. You will finally know how to handle every difficult conversation. Then you discover something liberating. There is no final version of you waiting at the end of the road. There is only the next version. That realization can feel disappointing if you have been searching for perfection, but it can also feel like freedom. You no longer need to become flawless before you are allowed to enjoy your life. You can be learning and still be worthy of affection. You can be financially imperfect and still begin building security. You can have questions about your sexuality and still have a meaningful, intimate life. You can struggle with confidence and still participate fully in relationships. You can make mistakes and still repair them. You can change your mind. You can begin again. That is where I want this journey to end, not with a formula, but with an invitation to become more awake to your own life. For years, many people have been taught to approach sexuality as a test. They wonder whether they are attractive enough, responsive enough, experienced enough, desirable enough, adventurous enough, masculine enough, feminine enough, young enough, or successful enough. They compare themselves with images, stories, expectations, and sometimes with partners' previous experiences. But intimacy is not an examination. There is no universal score. There is no perfect body. There is no single correct frequency. There is no universal script that every couple must follow. There is no magical number that proves a relationship is healthy. There is no financial balance that automatically produces happiness. There is only the question of whether the life you are creating is aligned with what matters to you and whether the people involved are treated with dignity, freedom, honesty, and care. That is a much more demanding question than am I normal? But it is also a much more useful one. Am I living according to my values? Am I listening to my body? Am I communicating honestly? Am I respecting my partner's autonomy? Am I protecting my health? Am I managing my resources responsibly? Am I allowing myself to experience pleasure without turning it into a performance? Am I building a future that gives me more choices rather than fewer? These questions connect sexuality, relationships, well-being, and financial freedom in an unexpected way. All of them are ultimately about agency. Agency means recognizing that while you cannot control everything, you can influence many things. You cannot control another person's desire. You can communicate. You cannot control your body's every response. You can care for it and seek appropriate help. You cannot control financial markets. You can diversify appropriately, manage risk, save, invest according to your circumstances, and avoid decisions driven by panic. You cannot control whether someone approves of you. You can decide whether their approval deserves authority over your life. You cannot control aging. You can decide how you want to relate to your changing body. You cannot control every circumstance. You can develop the capacity to respond. This is why agency is more durable than confidence. Confidence sometimes says, I know I will succeed. Agency says, whatever happens, I can participate in what comes next. That is stronger, because life will eventually prove that confidence based on certainty is fragile. A person can be confident about their career and lose the job. A person can be confident about their relationship and face an unexpected crisis. A person can feel physically healthy and later experience illness. A person can have a carefully designed financial plan and encounter an event they never anticipated. Certainty can disappear. Agency can remain. That is why resilience matters so much. Resilience is not pretending that difficult experiences do not hurt. It is not becoming emotionally invulnerable. It is not refusing to need anyone. Resilience is the capacity to recover, adapt, seek support, and continue making meaningful choices. And resilience can be practiced. Every time you have a difficult conversation, rather than avoiding it, you practice resilience. Every time you examine your finances, rather than hiding from the numbers, you practice resilience. Every time you acknowledge a health concern rather than pretending it does not exist, you practice resilience. Every time you say no when you mean no, You practice resilience. Every time you tolerate someone else's disappointment without abandoning your boundary. You practice resilience. Every time you make a mistake and repair it. You practice resilience. These actions may look ordinary. They are not. They are the building blocks of a strong life. There is a temptation in modern culture to search for dramatic transformation. We want the perfect routine, the breakthrough conversation, the revolutionary investment, the instant confidence, the extraordinary relationship. But sustainable change usually looks much less exciting. It looks like a person who checks their financial accounts once a week. A couple who has a difficult conversation before resentment becomes overwhelming. Someone who schedules a medical appointment instead of endlessly worrying. A person who takes 10 minutes to breathe and notice what they are feeling. A partner who asks, "What do you need?" A person who says, "I don't know." A person who says, "I changed my mind." A person who says, "That doesn't feel right to me." A person who says, "I would like to try this." A person who says, "Can we talk about money?" A person who says, "I need help." These are not dramatic sentences, but they can change lives. I think of a woman named Elena who spent years believing that being a good partner meant being endlessly accommodating. She rarely complained. She agreed quickly. She avoided difficult conversations. She thought conflict meant failure. From the outside, her relationship looked peaceful. Inside, she was disappearing. One day she realized that every time she swallowed a need, she felt temporarily safe and permanently smaller. She began practicing a different response, not aggressive, not accusatory. Simply honest. "I don't want that. I need some time. I would prefer this. I'm uncomfortable. I want to understand what you're asking. Can we find another way?" At first, she was terrified. She expected rejection. Instead, something unexpected happened. Her partner began learning who she actually was. That was the paradox. By becoming more honest, she became more visible. And being visible created the possibility of genuine intimacy. A relationship cannot deeply know a person who is constantly performing agreeablenes. Real closeness requires reality. This is why authenticity is so important. Authenticity does not mean saying every thought that enters your mind. It does not mean using honesty, an excuse for cruelty. It means your actions are not constantly disconnected from your values. You can be kind and honest. You can be direct and compassionate. You can have boundaries and warmth. You can disagree without humiliating. You can want something without demanding it. You can say no without hatred. You can hear no without revenge. That is emotional intelligence, and it is one of the strongest foundations for intimacy. The same principle applies to money. Authenticity in financial life means knowing what your money is actually doing, not what you want other people to think it is doing. A person may appear wealthy while carrying unsustainable debt. Another may appear ordinary while quietly building substantial long-term security. One may spend heavily to maintain an image. Another may choose a modest lifestyle because freedom matters more than status. There is no universal correct appearance of financial success. Financial freedom is personal. For one person, it may mean retiring early. For another, it may mean being able to leave an unhealthy workplace. For another, it may mean caring for a parent. For another, it may mean working part-time. For another, it may simply mean never again feeling terrified by an unexpected bill. The definition should come from your values and circumstances. This is why comparing your financial life with someone else's can be so destructive. You do not know their obligations. You do not know their debt. You do not know their inheritance. You do not know their family support. You do not know their risks. You do not know what they sacrificed. You do not know what they are struggling with privately. The same is true of relationships. You see another couple laughing at dinner. You do not see their private conversations. You see a photograph. You do not see their history. You see a moment of affection. You do not know what happened before the photograph was taken. Comparison takes fragments of someone else's life and compares them with a complete backstage version of your own. That is an unfair competition. Your task is not to reproduce another person's life. It is to understand yours. Ask yourself what makes you feel alive. What makes you feel safe? What makes you feel respected? What makes you feel connected? What makes you feel free? What drains you? What patterns keep repeating? What are you avoiding? What have you learned? What do you want to learn next? These questions are more valuable than asking whether you measure up, because measurement without meaning can become obsession. Meaning gives measurement a purpose. You can measure savings because you have a financial goal. You can track health markers because you want to care for your body. You can notice relationship patterns because you want greater connection. But measurement should serve life. Life should not become a servant of measurement. There is a particular danger in applying performance metrics to sexuality. People begin to count experiences, judge duration, compare responses, and search for evidence that they are succeeding. The more they monitor, the less they experience. The intimate moment becomes a report card, but imagine trying to enjoy music while constantly checking whether you are enjoying it correctly. The question itself interrupts the experience. Sometimes the most helpful thing you can do is stop evaluating. Notice. Breathe. Listen. Feel. Communicate. Allow. You do not have to turn every experience into a lesson. Some experiences can simply be experienced. This is where mindfulness becomes useful again, not as a promise of perfect relaxation, but as a practice of returning attention to the present. Your mind wanders. You notice. You return. Your body tenses. You notice. You adjust. You become distracted. You notice. You return. You experience uncertainty. You notice. You communicate. This is not failure. This is practice, and practice is what makes skills stronger. The same is true financially. You make a spending mistake. You notice. You adjust. You receive unexpected income. You notice. You allocate it according to your priorities. The market falls. You notice. You return to your long-term plan rather than automatically reacting, assuming that plan remains appropriate. Your goals change. You notice. You review the plan. This is why I would never describe financial freedom as simply a number. A number can help, but freedom is also behavioral. Can you delay gratification? Can you tolerate not having what everyone else has? Can you distinguish desire from necessity? Can you make decisions without needing social approval? Can you build reserves? Can you avoid high-cost debt where possible? Can you invest for long-term goals appropriate to your situation? Can you increase your earning capacity? Can you keep lifestyle inflation from consuming every improvement in income? Can you enjoy some of your money without guilt? Can you make a plan and revise it when reality changes? These are freedom skills, and many of them are emotional skills. The ability to tolerate delayed gratification is emotional. The ability to resist comparison is emotional. The ability to sit with uncertainty is emotional. The ability to discuss money honestly is relational. The ability to say no to a purchase is a boundary. The ability to spend according to values rather than impulse is self-awareness. Financial freedom is therefore not separate from psychological freedom. It is one expression of it. And sexual well-being is not separate from psychological well-being either. When a person feels chronically anxious, ashamed, pressured, or disconnected from their own choices, intimacy can become difficult. The solution is not always to try harder. Sometimes trying harder is exactly what creates more pressure. Instead, step back. Ask what the system needs. Does the person need rest? Does the relationship need repair? Does the body need medical attention? Does the couple need communication? Does someone need professional support? Does the person need permission to stop performing? This is an important distinction between effort and force. Effort can be constructive. Force can be destructive. You can put effort into communication. You cannot force another person to feel desire. You can put effort into financial planning. You cannot force markets to produce a particular return. You can put effort into health. You cannot command your body to behave exactly as you wish. You can put effort into becoming a more attentive partner. You cannot control how another person responds. Understanding this boundary between influence and control is one of the great psychological freedoms. Influence what you can. Respect what you cannot. This principle also protects relationships from manipulation. If I cannot control your feelings, I must communicate rather than manipulate. If I cannot guarantee your desire, I must create conditions in which choice remains genuine. If I cannot guarantee financial success, I must focus on responsible decisions. If I cannot guarantee health, I can focus on prevention, care, and appropriate treatment. If I cannot guarantee the future, I can prepare for it without pretending to predict it. That is adulthood. Not certainty. Responsibility under uncertainty. And uncertainty does not have to be the enemy. It can create possibility. If you do not know exactly how your relationship will evolve, you have room to discover. If you do not know exactly what your future career will look like, you have room to develop new skills. If you do not know exactly how your financial journey will unfold, you can still build a stronger foundation. If you do not know exactly what your body will need in 5 years, you can learn to listen to it now. Uncertainty becomes less frightening when you trust your capacity to respond. This is why self-trust is so important. Self-trust does not mean believing you will always make the right decision. It means believing that, when you make a mistake, you will be willing to face it, that when you do not know, you will seek information, that when you are overwhelmed, you will ask for help, that when you hurt someone, you will take responsibility, that when someone crosses your boundary, you will protect yourself, that when circumstances change, you will adapt. Self-trust is built through evidence. Every responsible action gives you evidence. Every boundary kept, every difficult conversation completed, every financial decision made thoughtfully. Every time you resist an impulse that conflicts with your values. Every time you seek care instead of hiding. Every time you admit uncertainty, you are teaching yourself, I can rely on me. That may be one of the most powerful forms of confidence. And it does not require you to be fearless. Courage is not fearlessness. It is action with fear present. You can be nervous and communicate. You can be embarrassed and seek help. You can be uncertain and make a plan. You can be disappointed and remain respectful. You can be rejected and remain whole. You can be criticized and still evaluate whether the criticism is useful. You can fail and still continue. That is resilience. I want to return once more to the idea of pleasure, because pleasure is sometimes misunderstood. Pleasure does not have to be earned through perfection. You do not need a flawless body to experience pleasure. You do not need a perfect relationship. You do not need complete financial security. You do not need to eliminate every insecurity. If you wait for the day when everything is perfect before allowing yourself to enjoy life, you may spend your life waiting. Pleasure can exist alongside imperfection. A good meal can exist during a difficult week. Laughter can exist during grief. Affection can exist during uncertainty. Rest can exist while goals remain unfinished. A walk can be meaningful without improving your productivity. A conversation can be valuable without solving every problem. A moment of closeness can matter even if it does not fit an idealized script. Allowing pleasure to exist without demanding perfection is a form of freedom. But pleasure also requires responsibility. Mutual consent. Respect. Health awareness. Communication. Boundaries. Financial sustainability. You do not have to choose between pleasure and responsibility. A mature life learns to combine them. This is where financial freedom becomes particularly relevant. If every enjoyable experience creates guilt, you may eventually rebel against your own financial plan. A sustainable system should contain room for enjoyment. Create a realistic category for discretionary spending. Decide what experiences matter. Spend intentionally. Avoid spending simply to prove something. Do not turn frugality into punishment. Money should support your values, not become a permanent source of fear. Likewise, intimacy should not become another obligation. If every affectionate moment is treated as a test, Pleasure becomes pressure. Create room for connection that has no required outcome. Talk, touch, laugh, sit together. Share experiences. Sometimes closeness is simply closeness. The absence of an expected result can make the experience richer. And this is perhaps the point at which all the ideas come together. The body, the mind, the relationship, the finances. The future. They are not separate compartments, they are parts of one life. When you reduce financial stress, you may have more emotional space. When you communicate better, you may experience more security. When you care for your body, you may feel more connected to it. When you stop comparing yourself with others, you may become more present. When you build self-trust, you may become more willing to be vulnerable. When you develop boundaries, you may create safer relationships. When you build financial reserves, you may gain more choices. When you gain more choices, you may feel less trapped. When you feel less trapped, you may find it easier to choose rather than comply. And genuine choice is at the heart of intimacy. This is why the journey is not about becoming a perfect sexual person. It is about becoming a more integrated human being. Someone who can listen to the body without being ruled by it. Someone who can listen to emotion without being controlled by every feeling. Someone who can use reason without becoming emotionally disconnected. Someone who can pursue financial security without making money the measure of worth. Someone who can love another person without losing themselves. Someone who can protect themselves without becoming incapable of vulnerability. Someone who can enjoy pleasure without turning it into performance. Someone who can say yes. Someone who can say no. Someone who can say, I don't know. Someone who can say, let's find out. That is a rich life. And perhaps the most important motivational principle is this. You do not have to transform your entire life today. You only have to make today's choices more aligned with the life you want to build. If you want greater financial freedom, look at one number. If you want better health, make one responsible appointment or habit. If you want greater intimacy, initiate one honest conversation. If you want more self-respect, honor one boundary. If you want less shame, replace one cruel thought with a more accurate one. If you want more connection, give someone your undivided attention. Small actions are not insignificant. They are votes. Every choice is a vote for a future version of yourself. When you save instead of spending impulsively, you vote for future flexibility. When you communicate instead of withdrawing, you vote for future trust. When you respect a boundary, you vote for future dignity. When you seek appropriate medical care, you vote for future well-being. When you choose rest instead of unnecessary exhaustion, you vote for future resilience. When you stop comparing your body with unrealistic images, you vote for future self-acceptance. You do not need every vote to be perfect. You need enough of them to establish a direction. That is what a life is. Direction repeated over time. There will be setbacks. You will lose patience. You will make purchases you regret. You will say things badly. You will misunderstand someone. You will feel insecure. You will have days when your body feels unfamiliar. You will have days when intimacy feels effortless and days when it does not. You will have financial surprises. You will have periods when motivation disappears. None of these moments has to become your identity. That may be the most important instruction of all. Return to your values. Return to communication. Return to curiosity. Return to your financial plan. Return to your body. Return to rest. Return to help when you need it. Return to the truth. If you lose your way, return. If you become overwhelmed, simplify. If you make a mistake, repair. If you do not know, learn. If you cannot do it alone, ask. If something no longer works, reconsider. If something matters, give it attention. And if you discover that you have been living according to someone else's definition of success, give yourself permission to write a new definition. Perhaps success is not looking young forever. Perhaps it is being comfortable enough in your changing body to remain present. Perhaps success is not having the highest income. Perhaps it is having enough resources and flexibility to live according to your values. Perhaps success is not being desired by everyone. Perhaps it is being able to experience mutual desire without needing universal approval. Perhaps success is not avoiding every difficult conversation. Perhaps it is becoming capable of having them. Perhaps success is not finding a relationship without problems. Perhaps it is building one in which problems can be discussed safely. Perhaps success is not eliminating uncertainty. Perhaps it is developing the wisdom to live well within it. This is where I want you to leave this journey. Not frightened of your body. Not ashamed of your questions. Not trapped by comparison. Not convinced that money alone will save you. Not convinced that a relationship alone will complete you. Not waiting for some future version of yourself to finally deserve a good life. You are already living the life that your choices are shaping. So shape it deliberately. Pay attention to where your money goes. Pay attention to where your attention goes. Pay attention to where your time goes. Pay attention to what your body tells you. Pay attention to the people who make you feel safe enough to be honest. Pay attention to the people who repeatedly ignore your boundaries. Pay attention to the stories you tell yourself. Pay attention to the difference between genuine desire and pressure. Pay attention to the difference between enough and never enough. Then choose. Choose what deserves your energy. Choose what deserves your money. Choose what deserves your trust. Choose what deserves your vulnerability. Choose what deserves your time. And understand that choosing one thing often means choosing not to choose another. That is not a failure. That is the nature of a meaningful life. You have limited time. Limited money. Limited energy. Limited attention. Use them intentionally. Do not spend your life trying to satisfy an imaginary audience. Do not sacrifice your future to impress people who may not even be watching. Do not sacrifice your present entirely in the name of a future that may never arrive. Build security, but live. Save, but enjoy. Plan, but remain flexible. Love, but remain yourself. Give, but maintain boundaries. Explore, but respect consent. Improve, but do not hate yourself into changing. Learn, but allow yourself to rest. And remember that the most valuable form of freedom be the freedom to experience your own life without constantly grading it. You are not a performance. Your body is not a product. Your relationship is not a competition. Your bank account is not your identity. Your past is not your permanent definition. Your mistakes are not your final chapter. You are a person in motion, and that means you can learn, you can adapt, you can repair, you can build, you can begin again. There is no perfect ending to this story because life does not offer one. There are only continuing chapters. Some will be joyful, some painful, some confusing, some unexpectedly beautiful. The task is not to guarantee that every chapter will be good. The task is to remain present enough to participate in all of them. So, when you leave this conversation, do not ask yourself, did I learn enough? Ask something more useful. What will I do differently? Maybe you will have one conversation. Maybe you will review your finances. Maybe you will stop criticizing your body for one day. Maybe you will seek professional advice about a concern you have been ignoring. Maybe you will tell your partner what you actually need. Maybe you will listen without trying to fix. Maybe you will say no. Maybe you will say yes. Maybe you will simply slow down long enough to notice what is already happening inside you. Whatever the first step is, take it deliberately. Then take another. Because freedom is rarely created in one dramatic moment. It is created through repeated choices. Intimacy is rarely created by one extraordinary experience. It is created through repeated trust. Financial security is rarely created by one brilliant decision. It is created through repeated responsible choices. Self-respect is rarely created by one inspirational speech. It is created each time you treat yourself as someone whose well-being matters. And perhaps that is the final lesson I would leave with. You, do not wait to become fearless before you begin living freely. Build freedom by learning, choosing, communicating, saving, caring, and returning again and again to the person you want to be. The goal was never perfection. The goal was presence. Not a perfect body, but a body you can inhabit. Not a perfect relationship, but a relationship where truth can survive. Not unlimited wealth, but enough financial freedom to create meaningful choices. Not constant pleasure, but the capacity to experience pleasure without shame and responsibility without fear. Not certainty, but self-trust. Not control, but agency. And when you have those things, you may discover that the life you were searching for was not waiting somewhere in the future. It was being built quietly, choice by choice, in the life you were already living.